All right, welcome on, everyone. I'm going to take a second to just tweet us out here on our live show, 15 and 60 Western Conference style. And we have so much to discuss. Of course, first 15 and 60, we're getting a look at all of these West teams. But before I do that, I need to actually make sure that people show up to this thing. So give me a second to do that. Go ahead and share. You can share with your friends, actually, if you want to. And of course, we'll take a few questions. We'll try to limit it to, team specific questions, like on stuff we're actually talking about, because we do have a lot to get through here.
Yeah.
All right, then. Care to make a face or two?
Sure.
The injury situation in the NBA early this season.
The NBA Cup starting Tuesday.
The Phoenix Suns and the viability of their start. All right, thanks for everyone saying hi in the comments, and let's do a podcast here. All right, welcome on to a West edition of the 15 and way more than 60 in this case. Is that joke still funny after 10 years? I think
well,
know.
I mean, I think it's even. We'll see if we get to the 15, but we'll get to that. But it's, I mean, this is a really fun time of year. You and I talk about this, and we don't have enough time to get super meta on it. But part of the fun of the beginning is that you're really trying to figure out signal, noise, and everything else. And like I was cracking up. I was cracking up myself. We had this conversation about, I brought up one of my big storylines is being worried about the Nuggets, and then they beat the Thunder and the Mavericks, and you're like, okay, that's the way it goes. And we're starting with the Denver Nuggets, 7-3 on the season. They still only have a +4 net rating, which is 11th in the NBA per Coding the Glass, 4th on offense, 20th on defense. And ESPN's BPI projects them to finish with 48 wins. That is 4th best in the West. And they have a very good chance still of making the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, the Nuggets, they're incredible. They are shooting, coming into today's game, 55% at the rim. That is tied for dead last in the NBA. They are shooting a league worst 41.9% field goal on self-created shots. That is not good. If they aren't getting assists, it's not going too well. It doesn't matter that Russell Westbrook has his usual under 50% true shooting, 8 or 9 points worse than league average, and a negative 11.6 net rating. It doesn't matter that Aaron Gordon and Jamal Murray are missing, along with KCP, from what had historically been the NBA's best starting unit. And it doesn't matter that Peyton Watson is somehow shooting 55% at the rim as one of the most athletic players in the league and 26% from three. Do you care to guess why none of that matters, Danny?
Because they have the best player in the world, and more specifically, the best regular season player in a while on their team.
All the shit that the Nuggets have been through, losing KCP, Michael Porter Jr. starting to play better now, but he had a slump. Murray has been out. Did he come back actually over the weekend? He
did. He played 30.
Yet
he
another
played 38.
incredibly close win. Yeah, it's right back to playing 38 minutes. In their win over the Mavs.
Oh, and he also played against the Heat on Friday, so he's played in too.
Yeah, because he was questionable for that. So he's back now. And so I think the fact that this Nuggets team, it almost doesn't matter who's out there with Nikola Jokic, because even when they were struggling, they still were fine with Nikola Jokic on the floor. Their intended starting lineup coming into today, plus 18.9, 136 offensive rating. And Nikola Jokic, I mean, that's insane. And Nikola Jokic, overall, they are a 128 offensive rating when he is on the floor. That's basically what the Celtics did for the second half of last year. So it's really
well, and
it's just insane how good they've been. I mean, some of the components of how they're doing it even are not like totally unsustainable.
And Nate, I didn't get a chance at this moment to watch the Nuggets-Mavs game that happened on Sunday. I was doing family stuff during the day, but I want to put out his line on it all the same. 37 points on 13 of 21 from the field, made all of his threes, also 8 of 8 from the line. 18 rebounds, 8 of which were offensive, 15 assists. So that if you like the triple-double stats, 37, 18, and 15, and plus 13 in a game his team won by 2, and he played all but 10 minutes.
And if you look at what they're doing with these groups on the floor at the Jokic, it's not only that they're making a ton of shots to the rim. In fact, they haven't been so dominant there. They are shooting a crazy number from 3. 44% from 3 with him on the court, although he has been helping with that, unlike sometimes in the past. They also are taking only 31% of their shots from 3 with him on the floor. That is 6th percentile. They have lowest 3-point volume basically again with him on the floor, but 35% offensive rebounds, which of course he really contributes to. And actually a big change from years past is they are getting to the foul line more. They are in the 94th percentile in free throw rate, where they've usually really struggled. That everyone's always complaining that Nikola Jokic doesn't get the star whistle. So in addition to just shooting incredibly well from mid-range and from 3 and still getting a ton of shots at the rim, even if they aren't shooting the best percentage,
well, and
they have been spectacular.
Speaking of not shooting the best percentage, one of the other players who's helped that free throw attempt rate is Russell Westbrook. I mean, he is their leader in free throw attempts per 36 minutes at 7.5. He's added Jokic, who has done better this year. And then how that evolves over the course of the year, including where the refereeing goes, is something that I'm going to watch. And I mean, it's also incredible. I mean, we've brought this up a little bit, but so Jokic is his ridiculous efficient itself, as we would expect. In terms of usage of guys who actually play for them, I want to run through a few of the true shootings. So next up in usage is Westbrook. He's at 49% true shooting on his 24 usage. Jamal Murray, 53%. He was off at the beginning of the year, is coming back from the concussion now. This doesn't include Sunday's game. Then MPJ, 40%. Aaron Gordon, 66%. Those guys are doing well. And then Struthers, 58. Watson, 47. And then now you're getting down like Brown's doing well, but he's only 50% usage. So it's like they're doing it in a lot of other ways. And remember, the part of the beauty of Jokic is that he generates really good shots for guys. So you could even see this go further.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to continue to shoot 44% from 3 with him on the floor, but I understand what you mean. Yeah, that it could look a little bit better. And, Russell Westbrook, his signing, I think, has been exactly what they were hoping for, because his overall stats are not very good. And, I mean, if you look at his net rating, negative 12.9 when he's on the floor. They are plus 18.9 when Russell Westbrook is off the floor. Their offense is 132.5 when Russell Westbrook is off the floor and 99.3 when he is on the floor. And their bench units haven't exactly slayed. But he's had 3 good games. All of them, I think, were in close games, if memory serves. And so that's 3 games that they probably, if they have Reggie Jackson in that spot, they don't win, right? I mean, they are 7-3. And when he plays well, they can take advantage of that. When he doesn't, they can kind of minimize his role a bit. Now, all this stuff in the playoffs, you wonder, right? Their shooting is still so miserable at times. And Westbrook, we saw what happened to him in last year's playoffs when you can really lock in on the stuff that he's doing. But it definitely, particularly because, again, OKC, we're going to see where they're at now with the Chet injury, and Phoenix, they just lost KD, and, Golden State's run along pretty well, but I don't know that they, I would still favor the Nuggets to beat them in a playoff series right now. So it's actually like, and they just beat Dallas too. Like again, they did have Murray back, but like, it's not like they can't beat good teams. They're not blowing anybody out other than really bad teams, but they're still probably the best clutch team because they have the best clutch player. So amazingly, after it was, they were looking like they could have been 0-4 at one point. They are now 7-3. And I mean, and again, to be number 4 in offense with the lack of shooting that they have had is pretty remarkable, I think. And I think they can get better defensively too.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, it's super early, but Jokic's MVP case seems to be being burnished to me, and it's early on, and there's a lot that could change. But that's he's been incredible.
Yeah, and there's nobody close to him. Again, one other thing too, and this is pretty exciting. We've gotten access now as a team to Sport Radar's tracking data and using the NBA cameras. So just barely had time to get into it this weekend with all the games that we were watching. But we're going to try to give you a ton of these really never before seen type of statistical nuggets. So one of the things that I just happened to look at, and yes, it does get this granular, is you can look at how teams do using double screen sets. So I kind of just went down that rabbit hole. There's another team that's actually really interesting, but the Nuggets basically never use any kind of a double screen set because they want Jokic to just set the screen. And why bring another defender into the action who could trap or mess things up?
Well, and who would be like the Buddy Hield in the Spain?
Right. Yeah. Either that or, I'm not sure if that includes Spain's. Like, it could just be more like a double drag. But yeah, KCP, they ran that all the time in the playoffs last year because he was being guarded by D'Angelo Russell. And they wanted Russell involved in the action. They got good stuff out of it. But KCP could pop for a three-pointer. They don't really have anyone who's going to do that at this point in time. So that was just kind of interesting. We'll get to another team that uses these sets all the time to varying effect. All right, let's move on here now to a game that you watched over the weekend. It was a blowout. The Houston Rockets and the OKC Thunder. Let's start with Houston. They are 6-4, 9th in the NBA in net rating. They are 12th on offense. We talked about how they have been absolutely assaulting the offensive glass, which has been a big part of that above average offense. 7th on defense, and ESPN's BPI projects them for 44-38, the 8th seed, and gives them a 56% chance of making the playoffs. What will you take away from the Houston side in that Friday big loss to the Thunder?
Kind of big picture. I think that it was like a game where Houston, as talented as they are, they got kind of run off the floor by Oklahoma City. And this was not a ridiculous like shooting performance, though a couple of guys did really well. I also thought that, kind of focusing on Houston's side first, that I've been perplexed by Jabari Smith Jr.'s season so far. Like, he was one of our stories, not only in the 23-24 season overall, but in that Rockets run. And he was, playing more at the 5 and was more active. And like, he wasn't as present. And like, you didn't really feel him that much defensively. He did have one block, had a couple of offensive plays, but not really that much. And my hope going into the year was that like Jabari was going to be the guy who took a real step forward. Now, Jalen Green has had some really nice moments. He was up and down in their loss to the Thunder, but so for me, from the Rockets perspective, it was, first of all, their starters got smoked by OKC's, but part of that was that I hope that Jabari was going to be a bigger part of this Rockets success.
Yeah, and I thought he had most of his success. They started him at the 5 when they went on that run without Şengün, and I thought he was an incredibly underrated part of what they did to be able to space the floor and also defend with versatility at that position, really switch 1 through 5. I think just watching him this year, he hasn't stayed in front of guys quite as well, but again, I haven't watched every single one of his possessions, but he's even like, it seems like Ime Udoka has gone away from him. Like, it's been Tari Eason closing some games out that are close instead of Jabari. To see if he closed today, actually, in their great win against Detroit, 101-99.
Hey, anytime you could beat a play-in team, that's important.
But yeah, Smith, I mean, the bigger thing, and I think this is tough for guys in their third year, is like he is a player who is just not going to be a major part of the offense. Like every once in a while he'll post up against a smaller guy, but he doesn't actually get a good shot there. Like he'll just shoot a turnaround. He can't move that guy. He's not going to get to the foul line. Like, all right, maybe he can make that shot. That's kind of what he did in college. That was some of the promise of him. But yeah, he's really an off-ball player, either shooting threes or, maybe finishing in transition or something like that. So he's 2 of 7 in the last game, 2 of 8 in this one against Detroit. And yeah, I mean, I will admit too, like there's always going to be some latent value for him that doesn't show up, even if you're staring right at him the whole time, because he's spacing the floor and he's also not someone that you can attack on defense. But he has not been making enough plays this year.
On the positive side for Houston, he didn't have the greatest box score game, but there were some moments from Jalen Green which showed me where he could be in a little bit if he could do this stuff more consistently. And so one of them was a play, one of the first really good Rockets possessions. Green draws Chet Holmgren and then feeds the ball over to Alperen Şengün. And without Chet Holmgren there, Şengün gets a pretty clean basket. And the drive with at least the openness to pass, and Jalen's been better about that the last little bit. And then the other one, which was a very different circumstance, Green off ball, so it looked like he was coming up to get the ball from Şengün. He had done a lot of that in the early part of the game and just hightails it on a back cut and just dusts. I can't remember who was defending him and gets a great dunk, uses his athleticism at that point. And then the next trip down, Jalen Green drills the catch and shoot 3. So we saw some of the on-ball stuff. We saw some of the off-ball stuff. Now, it wasn't every possession. It wasn't everything. But those showed parts of the way that he can help a good team, which is one of my questions last year with kind of that weird Rockets run. It was kind of a funhouse mirror. And, he was 5 of 14 from the field. It wasn't like it was his best game offensively or defensively. But sometimes I talk a lot about how with young guys, it's about the flashes. He's in his 4th year. It's not quite the same, but I still like some of the flashes.
Where do you feel like Amen Thompson is at this point?
I'm disappointed in that. And this isn't, I'm disappointed in Amen. It's that I'm disappointed that his on-ball game isn't where I want it to be. Like there were a couple possessions where it's like half court, seems like he has an athleticism advantage. He still has a handle, credible handle, and just not getting much of a place. And it's like, oh, he's drawing the help or something else. I think there were possessions where it's just kind of bottled up. The rest of his game, I think, is largely what I hoped and expected it would be. He's a very disruptive defender. He can defend a lot of different positions. And so that is useful on the Rockets, but it could be useful in other circumstances as well. But going back to last year, one of the things that Amen benefited from was more spacing in the front court. And there are ways that Ime Udoka has and can do that. But to use one of my long overused, but for a reason, phrases is my concern with Amen, and this even goes back to me being optimistic with him as a prospect, is if he's not an on-ball guy, is the juice worth the squeeze as a 35-minute a game guy? It's definitely, he's a rotation player at worst, but the on-ball stuff is such a prerequisite unless the jump shot comes around, and right now it's not.
The other thing I would say too is that in a matchup like this one against OKC without Hartenstein, Chet Holmgren was fantastic in this game, but he's someone that you would think Alperen Şengün could get into the post and really bully him. Didn't happen in this one. 3 out of 12. And Chet, hopefully we'll see if he's all right after this, that scary fall that he took against Golden State. So this was an interesting matchup. Again, we can get into these Sport Radar tracking stats of the team that makes the most contact on ball screens versus the team that makes the least contact on ball screens. And
Can I guess that the one with Steven Adams makes the most contact?
Well, and it's not only that it's the quality of the screener, but it's also just what they're trying to accomplish and who is setting the screen, right? So
Sure.
The Rockets do make the most contact. They have pretty big burly centers in Şengün, and then obviously Steven Adams, who's not a huge roll threat, but will lay the wood on the screen. And then you also, so the Rockets, this is your range, right? You've got the Rockets set basically what's classified as a screen where there's contact or the defender reroutes. So what you might consider a good screen, although that's very subjective, right? Because a good screen can also be you slip out of there, you get that guy open, or you fool the defense and the guy can drive anyway. So this isn't necessarily a metric of quality so much as it's a metric of type. But Houston makes contact, forces their defender to redirect. And also the reason for that is that they have two guys who the primary thing they want to do off the screen is shoot the three off the dribble in Jalen Green, who's been jacking them up. And that's part of how his three-point attempt rate is so high, by the way. And Fred VanVleet. And if they're going up against a team that is playing a drop coverage, again, you want to really lay the wood on that screen. Like, that's going to be some of their best half-court offense. They're not, an amazing passing team. Şengün's kind of hasn't been amazing so far himself so far this year. And then the Thunder, only about 40% of their screens make contact. The rest are characterized as either early slip outs or just the defender gets around it. But that's because they do so much of that guard screening action with a shooter like Isaiah Joe, for example, or someone quickly trying to roll to the rim, because you're trying to, the way that you beat a switch, and that's usually what teams are trying to do when it's a guard pick and roll a switch, is you slip out of there fast, you cause confusion. And I might say that the way I would want to defend OKC is to just be like, no, we're gonna really play to contact every time and not switch. And if you get something called out, don't turn your head and let Shai Gilgeous-Alexander blow by you. Let's try to actually force them to make contact on a screen. And then maybe we're not necessarily going to and that, all right, if they want to slip out and not make contact, great, but then we don't need to switch that, right? Then we'll just try to stay in front.
It's not like they're going to be setting a good screen in all likelihood in the first place.
Yeah. But I mean, that's much easier said than done, right? I mean, there's communication difficulties. There's, all right, I hear the guy coming. The screen is getting called out. You don't know whether he's going to make contact or not. And it's not like they never make contact. Someone like a Caruso can be a nasty screener at times too. And it's tough. You're looking for the screen. You're getting ready maybe to switch if there is contact. And then all of a sudden, while you're thinking about all those things, it's like, oh yeah, I can't actually stay in front of my guy to begin with, even though there was no screen. So that's what makes it so hard to deal with. But I thought that was interesting that this is a matchup of two very different screening styles here. The Thunder also, they have only used 12 double screen sets all year. That is actually tied for 27th. With the Warriors. And again, that's because they just don't run those kind of plays. They have one screener. It's often going to be a guard, or it'll be, a spread pick and roll type of thing. They don't really have a second guy. Maybe they could think about doing that, but they want to play with the floor space as much as possible, open up those driving lanes. Those double screens, those are really more about guys who can shoot the ball off the dribble, which they don't do quite as well from three, number one. And number two, guys who are going to make really complex reads and are going to take advantage of when the defense, doesn't quite switch correctly or something like that. So the Warriors also, who they played today, are also have only used 12 double screen sets all year that have led directly to a shot, is what this metric is.
It's really interesting stuff. Nate, before we forget, do you want to do the Thunder stats, and then I'll get into them on in the Rockets game?
Yes, and actually I did. I have one other Thunder stat too, but I'll save that for when we talk about the Warriors. But OKC did lose to Golden State tonight, 8-2. They are still number one in net rating at 14. They are 13th on offense. That's been getting a little better after the first week and a half or so. They're in the 20s. They've started to hit more shots. And they are number one by a country mile, 101 on defense, even after Golden State lit them up pretty well through three quarters and then had to kind of hang on a little bit in the fourth because they couldn't score. BPI likes them for the 1 seed, 57 wins, thinks they have a 100% chance of making the playoffs.
Unfortunately, one of the questions with that strength of the number 1 seed is going to be, what's going on with Chet Holmgren. He had that scary fall. We don't, as we're recording this, we don't really have too much in details. And
well, so I can talk about that a little bit, actually.
Yeah.
So the play that it happens, Andrew Wiggins beats a closeout in the right corner, drives in Chet, who's been the best rim protector, I would say, statistically in the league, he and Victor. Andrew Wiggins, very aggressive, goes into his body, and Chet gets upended. And it wasn't necessarily something that looked to me like something that would cause a lot of issues, like John Morant thing, which we'll talk about. Like that one, it was like, that was pretty obvious to me as soon as it happened that something happened there. He basically just like fell on his hip onto the ground. Now, I've never heard of a guy getting like a broken hip from something like that. It could have just been a really, really bad bruise. He was eventually ruled out. So he had a certain reaction that was pretty severe, and that does make you concerned. But I didn't see anything obvious just from the fall to indicate that that this could be some major thing. I mean, I haven't seen anything about it. I haven't looked in the last hour or so, but hopefully I'm correct that this is not going to be anything other than just, a bad fall and a contusion type of thing.
Yeah, here's hoping. And Holmgren was awesome offensively. I thought, he's obviously great defensively in the Rockets game. He has been pretty much every game this year. But I thought it was a breakout for him offensively. 29 points, 8 of 14 from the field, and got to the line pretty well, which sometimes can be a little bit surprising. I thought that worked well. And his movement, I thought, caused the Rockets problem. And it was another reason why I thought maybe something might have been wrong with Jabari Smith Jr. because it's
so his movement in one sense, like off the ball under the basket.
It was a mix. Like there were times where it's like, okay, you could get him the ball downhill and he could just he could get through things a little bit. He also did well in transition, just kind of busting his ass and doing well there. But so it wasn't as much. I've really liked at times the Thunder giving him more decision making because he could be a great QB keeper guy too. But we just haven't seen it as much from the Thunder as I would have wanted. Mark Daigneault does a great job. I'm not ripping him. But just the Rockets with Şengün and with Steven Adams as well, their centers are a little bit, Şengün moves well for a guy his size, but I thought it was some of that, but also the 3-ball falling makes everything work. 4 or 6 from 3, you have to get out on him a little bit, and then that creates space for everyone else. And this was a much better Shai Gilgeous-Alexander performance as well. We talked about how he's had some rough starts, and it was not about the free throw line. He got there 7 times, and this game was pretty out of hand at the halftime line. But then the other big takeaway for me, and I've brought this name up a couple of times already this year, and the Thunder are a very relevant team, is I think AJ Mitchell can play. I think that he is a capable backup point guard already, and Mitchell is a little. He's a little older than your average rookie. He's already 22. He turned 23 right as the offseason kind of begins. But I don't think that really necessarily matters here. I think that he makes good decisions with the ball in his hands. And so you could see that there was kind of more consistency to OKC offensively and they have, it's a rookie second round pick who's really doing a lot of that stuff. It's not Caruso.
He's incredibly steady. He really is.
Yeah, and I was super impressed. He has nice chemistry with Aaron Wiggins already. They had some nice stuff going on, and I'm really excited for how Mitchell works with Hartenstein when he potentially gets in. And I have this in my notes. I'm just I have a series of 4 in a row where it's just AJ Mitchell, because he had a drive. He had 2 straight. Or not 2 straight, 2 out of 4 possessions, nice drives, draws the defense in, and then kicks it to Aaron Wiggins for a corner 3. Wiggins makes both those to his credit. And then he had a pull-up confident 2 over Şengün. He had a driving and one. It's incredible. And so we have a group chat with a few other people, and I mentioned earlier in the day, there are only 3 rookies, and I'm not saying this is the stat on this, who have a value of a replacement player who have played real minutes over 0. And so they're all at 0.1. One of them is Zach Edey. One of them is Jonathan Mobo. And the third is AJ Mitchell. and AJ Mitchell. So he, like, in terms of that stat, which I'm not saying is definitive, he has been one of the most valuable rookies so far, and I agree with that.
Yep, and like he's basically been their primary backup point guard. Yeah, getting in the 10 to 15 minute per game range, and also I think he's not a great athlete, but he's strong at least. Like, he's not going to get run over, and he also just knows where to be in help defense. He's pretty aggressive there. Thunder are overall a very aggressive help team, and so this is the other really fascinating stat about the OKC Thunder. Their defense has faced 330 drives this season that have led to a shot or a turnover, either by the shooter or an immediate pass to someone who shot. The Thunder have allowed 0.785 points per shot off of a drive. That is first in the NBA by almost 0.15, like 15 points of offensive rating we're talking about here. I mean, that is just an insane number, and that correlates quite a bit with rim protection. It correlates quite a bit with how awesome their help defenders are as well. And so it's really, now, it also helps that opponents are shooting very poorly on threes generated by drives, but that it still is remarkable that they are just that much better. And yeah, there's going to be a shooting regression in all of these defensive statistics for OKC. Speaking of shooting regression, that was something that we talked about quite a bit because this team shot it so well from three a year ago. And Jalen Williams had a tough start to the year. He's back up to 40% from three right now. Holmgren is at 40% from three. Lou Dort, who we were worried was be one of the biggest guys, he's shooting 46%. Aaron Wiggins is 43%. Isaiah Joe, 40% on 11 per 36. Now, a couple guys that maybe you're concerned about slightly are Alex Caruso is shooting 21% from three right now and 37% from two. It's a little something to watch there. Let's see if he can kind of find his place. Now, his plus minus is still really good, right? Like I saw just like some terrible meme going around like, oh yeah, more points, rebounds, and assists for Josh Giddey. Like the Bulls fleeced the Thunder in that trade. I'm like, no, actually, Alex Caruso's way better than him, even if he doesn't make a single shot all year. And then the other one, Cason Wallace, is struggling some as well. He had been way above his pedigree as a shooter last year. He's hitting only 25% from downtown. But overall, the Thunder looking like they've found themselves. But the two things that are really interesting is they're losing the possession game by a ton on offense because they are 30th in offensive rebounding. And then they're also not getting to the foul line at all, either 29th in getting to the foul line. Shea has been way down there, about 4 per game down from where he was at his heights a season ago. Okay then. Let's talk about their loss to the Warriors without Chet.
Yeah, the team that dispatched them, the Golden State Warriors, are now 8-2. They are 4th in net rating, plus 9.8 per 100 possessions, 6th on offense, 2nd on defense. And BPI is optimistic on the Warriors, projects them to finish with 51 wins. That would be 3rd in the West. And yeah, I mean, so the Warriors in this past week beat the Thunder and the Celtics without Jaylen Brown, without Kendrick, without Kristaps Porzingis, both of which on the road. Like impressive wins. And you know, we had these concerns about, or acknowledgments about the Warriors that they were doing really well in the beginning of the season, but they were beating flawed teams. They've beaten some less flawed teams, even if Chet Holmgren only played 5 minutes in this one too.
Well, and that was a massive,
of course,
component of this one, because really going back to, I would say, since probably even 2016, that series against the Thunder, that Steph Curry, the biggest thing that actually makes him struggle counterintuitively is teams that have great rim protection. And now it certainly helps to have some switchability and also rim protection, right? If you can throw both those things together. And that's pretty rare to find. So you're not going to get a lot of that slowing down Steph Curry with that combination.
Well, and just briefly on that, that's a part of why you and I both saw Robert Williams as a huge part of that final series.
Yeah.
Or in the early going.
Yeah, and like that 50-point game 7 was against the Kings who have no rim protection, and then Steph struggled against Anthony Davis then in the next round. And, you see it during the regular season too. So with Chet out, OKC, who probably had the best center depth in the league coming into the season, now has their top 4 center options out without Chet. So they really had to cobble it together. They were going Dylan Jones at center. And so Steph, it really, like, you have to be, if you have a ton of length, you can guard him. But, like, they put, like, Case and Wallace on him for a lot, right? One-on-one. And Steph either was able to get his shoulder into him or forearm, knock him backwards and shoot a step-back 3. Or, if you're not, like, right in his grill, like Jones wasn't a couple of times, Steph can just get that shot off so quickly. And then if you do get that close to him, Steph is strong and he can get the shoulder by you. And he's not blindingly fast, but he's also, once he gets the shoulder by you, you're not going to get back in front of him. And he's a crafty enough finisher that you're not going to block his shot from behind. And so if you can't stay in front of him, now there's not much rim protection for the Thunder at the basket either. And this Warriors team has better shooting up and down the lineup than they've had in the past as well. So Steph absolutely went off in this game. 36 points, 13 of 23 from the field, 7 of 13 from 3. And there are just certain guys, even someone on as well-coached a team as OKC, who just, like, couldn't stay with him off the ball. Like Aaron Wiggins would switch onto him, thought he had him, and then Steph would just take 2 steps to his left as the drive took place, and he gets it off so quickly that Wiggins just, like, couldn't recover after losing sight of him for a second. That happened a couple of times. And, Jalen Williams, like, Steph is, like, getting by him and getting to the basket to score. The Thunder also, they kind of had a unique scheme where they were just going to put Dort or Wallace on him and generally not switch. Like, they weren't switching a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander onto him, for example, and Shai wasn't really, like, stepping out either, because I think they just decided we're not going to give up, like, little slips to the basket, right? That's the other thing that rim protection really bothers the Warriors on is, yeah, you might get your little slip to the basket, but if Chet Holmgren's coming over from the weak side, then you're still not going to score on that play, right? But then, all that stuff was going to work really well. So I think there's certainly other things that OKC could do in this matchup, but I was extremely interested to see what it looked like with all these great guards for OKC going up against Steph Curry. And, that's been a big question of mine, is like, can Steph Curry really bring it to have a dominant performance against a team like this? And without Holmgren, he was able to do that.
Something else that really helped the Warriors beat the Thunder was ridiculous 3-point shooting. They were just a shade under 50%, taking 43. They were 21 of 43 in total. And in old chestnut that you and I have talked about a lot over the years, because the Warriors have been so relevant, is it's not that the Warriors have to win the possession battle, but if they don't lose it by much, they're in really good position. And so in this one, they didn't, the teams were pretty even in terms of offensive rebounds. And then the Warriors were only -3 on turnovers, and they were actually +4. We've talked about this before, on steals. So they had a few more turnovers, but they were mostly dead ball. And so if the Warriors,
only 4 steals given up by Golden State to OKC is a very nice formula for them.
Exactly. And so if the Warriors can kind of hold that even, they have a much, much better chance. And you could even go back to those last 3 games in 2016 as another example of how that can go.
Yeah, another thing too is Andrew Wiggins usually guards his Canadian countryman Shai pretty well. And Shai has killed the Warriors at times, but not when Wiggins was at his best. Another interesting thing for Golden State, Trayce Jackson-Davis. I didn't hear anything about an injury for him. He played 5 minutes, and maybe it was just because Chet went out. But
and Looney didn't play at all.
Yeah, so it seems like Golden State really tried to go smaller as well. More Draymond at center. Kyle Anderson played some center for them as well. Gary Payton almost functions as a big for them. And then also Jonathan Kuminga, with very little rim protection for OKC, was able to get off getting to the basket in this game. He had 20 points. Was the second leading scorer. DeAnthony Melton also made his return. He started for Moses Moody, who has moved back into a bench role. They felt like they needed to get more, maybe more slithery defense on the floor and playmaking, and Melton was fantastic. He had 19, hit 5 threes, had 10 rebounds and 3 steals. So that was, and 4 turnovers. But yeah, I mean, Golden State, I think, the Jackson Davis thing, again, maybe he was hurt, but, this is an example of how Steve Kerr, with the buy-in he's gotten from everyone, can go to different groups that are going to work in different matchups. And Mark Daigneault tried to do that too. He started Aaron Wiggins in this one rather than Wallace, Joe, or Caruso, but Wiggins was negative 18. I thought he really struggled.
Where would you like to go next?
All right, let's see. So let's do one of these other games that you did over the weekend.
So those are Jazz Spurs and Clippers Kings.
Let's see if we have any comments here, actually, before we do that. Nothing new. Someone asking why we're dressed the way we're dressed, and that's because we don't respect you as an audience. This is a podcast, and we just turned our cameras on so we can be on YouTube. So yeah, it's you'll have to look elsewhere for your high fashion, I'm afraid. Yeah, let's do this Spurs Jazz.
And it was a competitive game, an interesting game, and I thought that really started at the beginning. The reason I really wanted to watch this one, actually, you want to do the Spurs stats before we get going?
Absolutely. 4-6, negative 3.7 net rating, 21st in the NBA. They are 25th on offense and 13th on defense. And those are decent numbers, I would say, for the Spurs so far. Obviously, they're missing Jeremy Sohan now. Victor is not having the greatest offensive start. So they're projecting for a 32-50 record, which would be the 13th seed, still 1% chance of the playoffs. And yeah, they are starting Castle, but Devin Vassell made his big return in this game. How did he look to you coming off of that foot surgery and coming off the bench as well?
I thought he looked good. And Vassell, the early part, this happens a fair amount with guys coming back from injury. He was hunting his own offense a little bit too much, but then eventually he fit in a lot better and actually closed this one for the Spurs. And Vassell's shooting makes a difference. I think that he will be an important part of this. I don't know if, I think he should start over Castle and you could get into it. But I thought that Vassell really, he gives them a different pace, a different verve. And again, I brought this up before Jeremy Sohan got hurt, but like having more credible shooters makes life easier for Chris Paul, makes life easier for Victor Wembanyama and everything else. And from San Antonio's perspective, I thought there was like one of the weirdest dynamics in this game was that Victor Wembanyama and for a short stretch, Stephon Castle were drilling threes, and then Julian Champagnie couldn't hit one to save his life. And I'm just like, what is going on here? So Wemby had a ridiculous stat line. 24 points, including 6 and 9 from 3, 16 rebounds, 7 blocks.
He dominates the Jazz. Like they've played the Jazz twice, and he's had like these massive block numbers against them.
Yeah, and I mean the Jazz are trying to go after the basket, and I'll talk about one of the guys who tried it a lot, and in mostly a positive way. But yeah, he's a ridiculous rim protector per Seth's stuff. He's still number 1 in rim protection wins and per minute. And I mean, Wembanyama is preposterous there. We'll talk about that more at various points during the year. And offensively, like my concerns about Wembanyama's ability to create one-on-one, that kind of stuff. Like honestly, all those concerns are still there. He had a nice game. And he did hit some pull-up threes. And I mean, I do still have some of the, like, is the Wembanyama pull-up three, even if in transition or in the half court, like really that good of a shot? But he made him in this one, and that helped keep the Spurs afloat. And then the other big Wembanyama thing is, yes, they lost this game, and yes, they could have won it at a number of different times, was that after particularly, it was true the whole game, but it was really, really true in the fourth quarter after Wembanyama checked back in, which was about 5 minutes to go in the game. Every Jazz made basket in the half court felt like a miracle. Like it was, so they had a couple of them, like Clarkson and Sexton just like threw some stuff up at the end of the clock and it went in. Those sorts of things. Now, transition, Utah was able to get some stuff. I want to talk about that. But part of how you see Wembanyama is, I always think about this as like, and part, yeah, I was the feed I was watching was the Spurs announcers, and so they, of course, every basket an opponent makes is always a fluke, always crazy. But like, I was watching it myself, and I was like, that was a bad possession. Oh, it went in. That was a bad possession. Oh, it went in. And so that can bear some real positive dividends for San Antonio in the future.
So we talked about Victor and his Defensive Player of the Year possibilities. They are currently 105.8 defensive rating with him on the floor, 114. Still actually reasonably respectable with him off. So, but that still is a crazy difference. Maybe not so much for this exact time of the year, but to be 8.3 points per 100 better defensively with him on the floor. Now, the problem is on offense, they're only a 102 when he's on the floor and 111 when he's off. And yeah, you know what? Like, he turns the ball over a ton. Like, he's not particularly efficient. Even in this game, he had as many turnovers as 2-point field goal attempts.
Yep.
And he was 2 of 6 from 2. And yeah, I realize that they don't have a lot of spacing. They do still have Chris Paul as a really good passer. And I also realize that they want him to explore the studio space. But, like, yes, Victor Wembanyama is not going to be the greatest shooter of all time. Like, it's not going to happen. He very well could be the best pick and roll finisher of all time. but they just are not able to get him the ball in those circumstances for whatever reason. And yeah, okay, he's probably great. Jeremy Sohan, but like, how is it that Jeremy Sohan can generate, 10 shots a game around the basket and Victor like can't do that? And then you take him out and it's like, oh, we're gonna get more shooting by bringing Castle. He shot it well in this game, but he's not getting guarded, obviously. So, it's while there are many, many external factors, and Victor even was saying the right things about how he wanted to focus more on finishing around the basket and all that, it's not happening. And like, he deserves some blame for that, right? Like, I don't think that Anthony Davis, in his rookie or sophomore year was playing on some like juggernaut with unbelievable spacing or something like that. And like, he was still dominating around the basket when he certainly is by his second year. So there needs to be, I think, more of a mentality change from him if he's going to become the player that we hope that he can be.
One possession that stuck out to me was Wembanyama got the ball with Cody Williams being the person who was close to guarding him. And Williams can be a capable defender. You saw it on the film, but it's not always there. And I thought Cody Williams did a totally credible job guarding Wembanyama. They didn't send any help or anything like that. And, got a contested shot. I can't remember whether it went in or not, but I'm like, Cody Williams just did a pretty good job defensively there. And Wembanyama has a lot of different ways that he can improve and he can grow his game, but it's going to need to happen because where it is right now. And you brought up Castle's shooting, and he was 3 of 7 from 3, which is great. He's struggled early in the year. All 3 of those threes were in very, very quick succession. He had a 3 with Kessler in a drop. Then he hit one, a nice one. I think it was catch and shoot, a step behind the line. And then Kessler hit a heat check 3, like just kind of pulled a little bit early, took it. Then he didn't make another one the rest of the game. But I want to give Kessler credit because he really did still help the Spurs offense by really working in transition. And that could be on the ball, it could be off the ball, but he was just going to be a blur out there. And, he tried hard in defense. He's a capable defender. And there were possessions where his effort generated a better look than it would have before. And that is a type of player that San Antonio needs. It's the type of player that they have. I mean, I don't know if that play, it's going to take the other stuff developing for him to be to be that kind of guy, but I appreciate what Castle was doing, in part because I've watched, I love watching Wembanyama. I've watched a fair amount of the Spurs this year, and it is something that's kind of lacking. Like Keldon Johnson plays with purpose sometimes, but he doesn't have the athleticism and the kind of like the quickness that Castle does. So it's nice to see that in a rookie, and in a rookie who is playing, at least at the start of the year, is playing a real role for San Antonio.
The Jazz are 2-7. But they've had a couple of decent wins. They got off the schneid. They won this one. If we didn't mention that, by 1 in San Antonio. And where did they get their other win? Oh, Chicago.
Yeah.
Without Lowry, actually. They smoked them. Yeah, we talked about that game on Wednesday. So they are still 29th in net rating, negative 13.3. They are 30th on offense, 25th on defense. They project for the 15 seed, only 26 wins. Isaiah Collier came back Thursday, only played 4 minutes, but he actually started this one.
Oh, yeah.
And what did you make of his performance?
He wasn't dominant, but I liked what I saw from him. And this goes back, with Collier, we talked about it Summer League. I watched film on him for Dunc'd On Prime, and he attacks the basket aggressively. He also shoots aggressively, and the ball didn't go in for him. But Collier, he was trying to get downhill. He was trying to make something happen. And, he made all 3 of his 2s. He missed all 6 of his 3s, and that doesn't necessarily work out. And he made some good passes too. So Collier started because Keontae George was unavailable. I think that's going to be, last I saw, I think that's going to be a relatively short-lived injury, thankfully. But Collier did that. And a part of why the downhill game worked is they had Larry Markkinen back, and the Jazz offense is just so much more competent when Markkinen is out there. And so there were better driving lanes there. And but something that was incredible is like Markkinen was 3 of 7 from 3. Rest of Jazz starters were 1 of 11, and that's Walker Kessler didn't take any, of course. And, Cody Williams only took 2, missed them, and then Collier's 0 for 6. And so I thought that he played, he carried himself well. The game that Collier was playing at this point is more of a backup guard, even if he's successful at it, but he can do that. And I thought that defensively, Collier held his own reasonably well. And, he wasn't always the guy on Chris Paul. They bounced around the assignments a little bit, but I thought he did a pretty good job.
Yeah, as long as he's not being guarded by a 7'5" monster who's just going to let him fire away from 3 and miss. Yeah.
And Collier's 3-pointer is, along with kind of his mentality, is the swing skill for him. And so, it just came back from this injury. So we'll have to see with that. And
this closing lineup for the Jazz was insane.
It really was. And remember, they won, but so I've kind of been honing this idea that like John Collins having a big game is in some ways more about the limitations of his opponent. Collins, he was able to get around the basket. He was able to get some rebounds, and he did a lot in the non-Wembanyama minutes as well. He did some when Wemby was out there, but I thought that Will Hardy, Collins, you could argue at points was their best player on the floor, especially in those bench lineups. But so the closing 5 was Collins, Markkinen, and Kyle Filipowski. So you're playing 3 bigs that aren't Walker Kessler. and Sexton and Clarkson, and Sexton and Clarkson, you're trying to generate offense and everything else. Especially you want some shooting out there, considering you're playing 3 bigs. Why you're playing 3 bigs? Well, a part of why you're playing 3 bigs is because Cody Williams was non-existent most of the time on both ends, but especially on offense, and so you need players who are actually going to be guarded out there.
They got to have the worst small forward situation in the league, right? Is there any?
They did last year. They drafted one, and they still do. It's not. Sensabaugh didn't play at all in this one, which I believe was a DNP-CD, and I guess.
Yeah. Actually, on that point, I think part of how they're going to be a little more competitive is they've moved Johnny Juzang into that spot, and he's actually going to make shots and at least slightly execute.
They
also got
Johnny Juzang is not a fantastic NBA player, but he does, he does enough. And the Jazz standards are really weird. A stray note, but a weird piece of frustration watching the Jazz. And I wonder if their fans feel the same way. Walker Kessler, Kyle Filipowski, and Lauri Markkanen were number 22, 23, and 24. They're somewhat similar heights, somewhat similar builds, somewhat similar hair. And every once in a while, like, I would have to edit my notes to be like, oh crap, that nice pass was by Filipowski. It wasn't by Kessler, or it was.
It wasn't by Markkanen.
Probably not.
He's thrown a couple. He's got a little better there.
I mean, Filipowski had some really nice passes in this one. His defensive limitations are there, but like, he can be a part of an offense as a facilitator, and it wouldn't surprise me to see Will Hardy try to utilize that at points, especially in some bench units. Like, he had some dimes, and that was impressive. He had one that, like, the one that I had to edit in my notes. I should have thought that it probably wasn't Walker Kessler, but he did it. It was a nice pass from Filipowski to Patty Mills, a name that is also on the Utah Jazz, on a cut. And so, like, yeah, there's some stuff that they could do out there. And as I mentioned, every Jazz basket felt like a miracle. And like, one of the young guy ridiculousness things in this game was, there were at one point early in the game, there were back-to-back fouls on three-point shooters, neither of which was really necessary. And then that culminated with, at the end of the game, the Spurs fouled Jordan Clarkson shooting a three. It was a pretty low hope, not no hope, but low hope chance. And, he makes, I believe he made all three of those free throws. And that helped give the Jazz a lifeline. Like, they weren't getting good shots ever in the half court at the end of that game, but the Spurs made, kind of, to me, part of the story was they made enough mistakes to kind of keep things around. And then Champagny hit the only three he made in the entire game to kind of cut it to 5. But the other thing is, like, the final score in this game was 111-110. That makes it seem slightly closer than it was, because Devin Vassell hit a half-court shot as time expired, down 4. And, like, the Jazz never, or the Spurs,
at least he went for a 3.
Yeah, at least for a 3. But, like, I believe the Spurs never had a shot in the air that would have tied or given them the lead in the last, like, minute or so. I could be wrong. That's just as I'm remembering it, as I'm remembering a couple days after. But, like, it was a little bit beyond that. And then, like, part of it was the Jazz, like, hit a couple of shots late. But, Clarkson missed one of the 3 free throws. That's right. But yeah, so I think Utah, I don't think they're world beaters, but they are significantly more competent when they have Markkanen. Even though this wasn't the greatest plus-minus game from him, I still think they need Walker Kessler out there more. Like, he can finish easy shots. He can contest things around the rim. Like, I think that it just kind of keeps opponents honest. And he's the only guy defensively who really does that for them. And the other part of that equation is, there have been times in other years, like it came up recently, it's like with the Kings have done some stuff, and the Pelicans last year, of like, you can be a competent defense at times without a great rim protector, but Utah does not have the perimeter defenders to do that. And so to me, like, yes, I know their priorities in winning, but it's like, oh, well, you're going to play other guys. Walker Kessler is a good young player, even if last year was a weird step back. And so to see him get marginalized, partially because John Collins did well, it's like, okay, like, they won the game. Maybe
I think they just got to the point where they're like, okay, we're gonna at least need to be like semi-competent here. Like that, like it was just becoming too much of a joke, and they're like. So I think Will Hardy just thought that John Collins gave him the best chance to win.
And I mean, Collins played well, so I'm not going to say like playing John Collins was wrong. Yeah. Like he did a nice job in this game, and he did most of his work in the non-Wemby minutes, and Wembanyama was out there in crunch time. But yeah, I thought a nice win for the Jazz, a road win for the Jazz, and they move forward. And for San Antonio, I mean, we'll have to kind of see where this goes. I know that the BPI projection is for 32 wins, and they are 4-6, and they've been competitive as they were in this one in some of their losses. But I still think there's a lot of work, both the players they have and the players they need at this point. And building a good team usually takes a long time for a reason.
Phoenix, 8-2, great start for them. They were 8-1, lost today without Kevin Durant, sadly, to Sacramento in overtime. But I didn't get a chance to watch that one. But they lost at home. Still only 1.5 net rating. That is 13th in the league. 16th on offense, interestingly. 12th on defense. They project for a 52-win season, which would be the 2 seed right now. That'd be one ahead of number 3 Golden State as it's projected right now. And coming into today, although this number is probably shifted since they lost an overtime game to the Kings, the Suns had added, per our stats here at Dunc'd On, 3.6 clutch wins already, and those stats add basically wins on top of where you would be expected to win a clutch game based on what the score was when you enter the clutch. So if you're down 5, obviously your win expectancy is a lot lower than if you're up 5 when entering that last 5 minutes. So yeah, they've added 3.6 clutch wins, probably gave one back, or at least half a one today. And Jusuf Nurkic was in the midst of an unbelievable start to the season defensively. Maybe interesting with the Mike Budenholzer. But then he left the Sacramento game due to an ankle sprain. Only went 15 minutes in that one.
Yeah, it wasn't clear that Nurkic was going to play against the Kings, but then he did play and then had to leave early. And yeah, Nurkic, as we're recording this, he is 5th in the entire NBA in Seth's rim protection wins stat. Now, the pool actually might be a little bit worse than that. I think that might be per possession. He's 5th, but it's really impressive. And some of the kind of the stats on that, opponents are only taking 29 shots in the restricted area per 100 possessions when Nurkic is out there. That is one of the lowest figures for active rim protectors in the entire league. And when you consider that the Suns are playing they play KD at the 4, but other than that, they don't really have that much other kind of size on the forward line, or, they play, depending on how we're counting positional size on the perimeter. And Nurkic contesting 36% of shots. That's not like Holmgren-esque, but it is very good.
Yeah, so we'll see. Hopefully he can come back, and him being healthy throughout last year was one of the undercounted successes for this Phoenix team. So we'll talk about their game against Dallas. I thought the end of it was fascinating, but what's it going to look like without KD now? I guess we can start to take some away from what they did tonight.
It's going to be hard to replace KD, in part because the lack of kind of suitable guys. So I thought it was worthwhile that Budenholzer started Ryan Dunn in KD's place rather than Royce O'Neal. And I mean, Dunn is a capable defensive player, and I don't know if they knew that there was some sort of they knew Nurkic was limited because there was a significant chance he was going to play in the game. But Dunn played, and he made his 2s, didn't make his 3s in this one. Well, that's something we're going to probably track a lot of the year. And Royce O'Neal played a ton, but he's played a fair amount before. And they did go, I mean, so you look at kind of the Suns did play, like a fair amount of front court guys. Like Okogie played 16 minutes, O'Neal played 28, both off the bench, Iguodala and Plumlee. But the Iguodala-Plumlee minutes, that's mostly because Nurkic only played 15.
Yeah, I think Iguodala probably wouldn't have been in the rotation. But now Josh Okogie had been playing at least a little bit.
Yeah.
But now he's probably the main guy who's going to play who wouldn't have been playing. But we talked about this the last time we discussed the Suns, that they weren't getting that much out of Bradley Beal. He can ramp up more on the offensive end, and he led them with 28 points in this one. But he also, and he's actually been their primary defender at the end of games. So now that maybe they'll put Dunn or O'Neal in that role. And then, but the problem is that they just don't have a 4 who's really going to protect the rim and obviously space the floor the way KD did. And he's, big surprise that a guy like him would be a difficult one to replace. But yeah, they don't have anyone who can kind of provide that supplemental rim protecting and rebounding role.
Well, and briefly to walk through kind of what the Suns' schedule is going to look like over these hopefully just 2 weeks that KD's out. They go on a road trip starting Tuesday. They play at Utah, at Sacramento, who they just lost to, at Oklahoma City, and then the subsequent week they play at Minnesota, and then they come back to Phoenix and host Orlando, New York, and LA. So I think they should be able to weather some of that storm. I mean, playing the Jazz is definitely helpful, and the Magic without Paolo. But those, to me, that Knicks game and that at Sacramento game are going to be the two that I'm really interested in, because those are games I would have probably expected the Suns to win, but now they become a lot dicier.
Yeah, and this reevaluation is in 2 weeks, so it'll probably be at least 3. It is the left calf. He tore the right Achilles, of course, but so that's and he's had some calf issues. Had one, in fact, in the Olympics, which led to him having a slow start. But yeah, KD had been unbelievable, particularly in the clutch, and hopefully this isn't going to derail his or the Suns' season, even if they had, of course, been over their heads some to begin with. So this game against the Suns, I want to focus in on the last 6 minutes or so. The Suns had just taken a 7-0 run to take a 1-point lead after Dallas had erased what had been a 14-point lead earlier. And I'll kind of just intersperse my observations here. I didn't think Dallas was getting a lot out of Klay Thompson. They are the team that does a lot of isolations, and teams do a lot of isolation against them, as we'll get to. But Klay had one play in semi-transition where Royce O'Neal just kind of lost him, and Luke was able to find him in the corner. But and they ran like a few Spain sets, but they also have Kyrie Irving, who they want to be involved in some of these actions. And I thought Klay did defend reasonably well. I thought they should have put him on KD more than they did. They tried him on Booker as well. And I didn't think that the Suns were just killing them. In fact, I would say the bigger issue wasn't necessarily the individual defense, but the lack of help defense, because Lively is out with the shoulder in this game. And Daniel Gafford, they tried switching him. Then they tried going into a drop coverage. Neither of those worked particularly well. Gafford switched on to KD when Luka actually had the primary matchup against KD for a few possessions. Gafford switches onto him, and KD just pulls a 3 right over him, and Luka was just like apoplectic that Gafford didn't get up enough and make him drive. Now, the Mavs defense overall, as we'll talk about, has been really good. But in this one, they just didn't really have, in these matchups that weren't desirable. I don't think it's that you can't survive those matchups. It's that they also just didn't have the athleticism to fly around, because PJ Washington was also out with this sprained knee. So you're missing your starting 4 and 5, easily the most athletic players, certainly from a lateral movement standpoint, in your starting lineup. I thought it was interesting that Najee Marshall did not play other than in like defense only possessions. They went with Dinwiddie, surprisingly enough, who was kind of left for dead this preseason, but has actually been playing okay. So Suns do end up winning this one in the end, and that was despite the Mavs just going after Tyus Jones every single time on the defensive end. That's another reason why Klay wasn't as involved.
That gets into something that I'm wondering about from Budenholzer, which is, and maybe this is different with Kevin Durant out now, but I don't think that Tyus Jones is going to be doing a lot of running the offense late in games. And
yeah, so let me talk about that actually, how
Sure.
they used him. It's good to bring that up. So, they did have him set a screen for KD. Like, he is a smart player. He can get them into the matchup that they want, or run a pick and roll, being guarded by their worst defender with a KD, and force that worst defender to be involved. Now, selecting the worst defender for that Dallas perimeter group can be difficult. Again, respecting that Dallas is like a top 5 defense right now, so we won't go too far on this. But they did take him out with about 3 minutes to go to bring in Booker, and they've largely closed without Jones, although he was good tonight. And that's another thing that's going to happen too, is without KD, they probably need the additional ball handling now. And so now you're going to have to play Jones at the end of games, and teams should be able to go after him a little bit more. Again, I didn't see this one, but I would imagine the Sacramento Kings might have run a pick and roll or two at Tyus Jones with DeMar DeRozan in this one. But yeah, but I think, they signed him. He's playing a lot. I think he's giving them what they hope for. But I also think it makes perfect sense to not play him at the end of games when they're whole. Yeah, I think Yusuf Nurkic also, it would be fateful on the last possession of the game as well. He had a couple of nice plays rolling to the basket. He shouldered everyone out of the way for an offensive rebound and had like a huge two-handed dunk. And then he also had an easy pick and roll finish. I thought Gafford just really struggled in this one. They tried to put him in drop. Then again, you have this issue where he's not, if you really have the floor spread, he's not an amazing pick and roll defensive technician, right? Like that was the thing. He was really effective in that OKC series, in part because they weren't running pick and roll right at him. They finally kind of figured out to do that in games 5 and 6, but they weren't running pick and roll right at him. He was able to hide out on, whatever 5'11" guard was standing in the dunker spot at that point. And as an off-ball rim protector, Gafford is fantastic. But if he's involved in the action, he's not really that great at the cat and mouse game. And then they also don't have athletes on the weak side who can either tag the roll man or close out. So they really were, Dallas, struggling to find something that was going to work. And hey, the Phoenix Suns should be a pretty good offense with Beal, Booker, and KD. Although, of course, Beal only basically got one shot during this period. The very end of the game was pretty interesting. KD hits a 2 to put Phoenix up 2 with 31.4 left. Dallas gets a timeout to advance it. Maybe a little late for the 2-for-1. But Phoenix was so concerned about giving up a 3 to go down that Luka just got an easy alley-oop to Gafford as Phoenix was kind of sticking to the shooters out of pick and roll. And then they go for Devin Booker controlling Phoenix down the end. Royce O'Neal actually worked pretty decently as a roll man and kind of almost Bruce Brown-like. He doesn't have that level of quickness or that floater game, but he was actually able to slip out, get a couple of downhill drives. He misses the floater, and then O'Neal just shoves Gafford completely out of the way after he came down from his own missed floater. Nurkic then was able to get the rebound. He and O'Neal both shoved Gafford at the same time. It was an incredibly obvious foul, but like we saw on that tip-in for Brandon Miller on Wednesday, that you could just get away with anything at the end of the game on the offensive glass. You might as well go for it. So then Nurkic got fouled after getting the rebound with 0.8 seconds left, made 1 out of 2, and then the Mavs were able to get it in, but Luke had to just jack up a quick shot with 0.8 left. It wasn't close from the logo.
I want to do Dallas's stats. They're 5-5 on the year, but still 7th in net rating plus 5.8, 9th on offense, 6th on defense. One of the few teams top 10 in both still. BPI projects them to finish with 48 wins, which would be 4th in the West. And something that we may want to try to remember towards the end of the year, we won't, but we'll try to. The Mavs they're now 1-3 in these 4 games since Derek Lively went out. And you can make an argument that they would have won all 3 of those games.
Yeah, because they lost by 2 to Denver today.
They lost by 2 to Denver. They lost by 1. They lost by 1 to the 1 or 2 to the Suns. And then the game against the Pacers was, I think that one could have easily been different without.
Yeah.
With
and worth noting too, they also had no PJ Washington for all these games too, right? Like
correct.
Against Denver, I actually would have really wanted to see what it looked like with Washington guarding Jokic and then Lively on the back line, but obviously they couldn't deploy that strategy.
And that is not to say that Dallas is the unluckiest team or that they did all this stuff, but it's like, yeah, they're 5-5, but there's some context here. Like I haven't seen anything that has made me particularly less confident in what they are as a team. I mean, that doesn't mean they're going to win the Western Conference again. Far from it. But I'm not concerned about them in the slightest.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I am just because there is a certain House of Cards aspect if they lose Lively because they just then aren't athletic enough. Like they are really relying on his mobility and shot blocking and maybe even his passing as well to provide some important aspects that nobody else can really duplicate there. And interestingly enough, the Mavericks this season have a 10.2 net rating when Derek Lively is on the floor and only a plus 1.7 when he is off the floor. And he has only played a little less than a quarter of their minute, or a little more than a quarter of their minutes so far this year. Also worth noting, Najee Marshall, 9.9 net rating. It probably should find a way to give him more time. Quentin Grimes, 13.4 net rating. Again, these are very small samples. A lot of these are that their defense is really good with those guys in there. And yeah, with Gafford on the floor, they're 8 points 100 worse on defense than when he is off the floor. I said they were third in defense. They dropped to sixth after giving up a $122 to that Nuggets again juggernaut. And a couple other interesting things from them. They are part of how they've been effective, and this has been the case for a while, but now these stats are even better, is they're forcing a league high 14% of possessions to be isolations per that Synergy. I guess I should say Sport Radar owns them now. Their stats. So that's just staying solid, switching, forcing the opponents into difficult shots. And then they are number one in setting double screen sets. They've shot out of 102 of those. The next highest is the Hornets with 68 on the season. So 25% of their pick and roll possessions are double screens. They are at 0.49 points per chance on those. Which I think that's just small sample size. Unlucky. What it is the way opponents are defending those is just leading to a lot of jumpers off the dribble for the ball handler. Luka hasn't been very good off the dribble. So they are missing a bunch of threes and mid-rangers off the dribble out of those sets. And that's probably the best thing you can hope to give up, quite frankly, on those plays. Because, yeah, if you put two on the ball, then Luka is just... And then remember, they killed the Wolves with those sets in the playoffs last year. So there's a reason they run so many of them. Like, I don't think that it's like they should stop running them or something. I think they're just haven't gotten lucky, or they've gotten unlucky, I should say.
Well, and Nate, on that defensive isolation stat, another one that connects to that is that the Dallas Mavericks have the third longest opponent time to shot after Dallas makes a shot in the league. And so that, isolations take time, all that type of stuff. And Dallas, they're kind of within the morass. No one is really an outlier on that end. The Jazz are an outlier on the other end, that teams are getting really short possessions against them, which is not the greatest thing about the Jazz defense. But that is kind of buttressing what you're saying.
Let's I'll let
I have a place I want to go with. We've done a lot of kind of like longer game recaps. This one's not going to take as long. That's the New Orleans Pelicans. You want to do their stats?
Well, are we going to read their injury list? Because then it is going
that will be we'll only do the new injuries. That'll take.
They are 3-7, an execrable negative 11.4 net rating. 26th on offense, 29th on defense, and BPI says they are going to be the 12th seed, 37 wins, only an 8% chance of making the playoffs, and they are going to get Trey Murphy back, it sounds like, on Monday against Brooklyn, but Zion Williamson, strained left hamstring, that hamstring, the one that cost him the second half of the 2022-2023 season, the one that put him out of that play-in game against the Lakers. He had right hamstring soreness earlier in the week, and he is now out indefinitely. And I mean, this is just now the third time that he's injured this, and indefinitely, who knows? But he hadn't been playing all that well anyway. But it just, let's hope this is something that he can actually come back from, right? Because the first time he missed 4 months, and probably more than that, honestly. You don't know when he would have been able to come back. Same thing with the Lakers thing as well. So you just, is this going to be months? They have him out indefinitely. Anytime you hurt something that you've already hurt, it's going to be the case. But, could this finally be like this is a big enough problem, Danny, that I'm thinking like, all right, maybe this is just it for the Zion era in New Orleans.
I don't want to be there, and I'm not quite there yet, but it may be coming relatively soon. And
yeah, I mean, if we were doing our potential biggest stories of the year that we did earlier this week, right now, that would be one of the top 5 that like we may look back and be like, all right, well, this is it. Like they have now reached the point where they just can't build around this guy anymore.
And every year, a few teams have seasons from hell. There's a possibility of
there are a lot of teams having seasons from hell. There's some teams that committed some quite a few sins of the offseason, apparently.
And New Orleans, though, I mean,
yeah. You let Najee Marshall go for nothing other than luxury tax dollars, you will be smited by the basketball gods.
And so on top of Zion, Jordan Hawkins he's dealing with a lower back strain. He's probably going to miss a week or two, so that's not nearly as serious as Zion, but Hawkins needs to play an important role with all the other guys out. And this means that Brandon Ingram is the only one of the Pelicans 4 kind of central players available. CJ McCollum's still out. Zion, of course, we just talked about. And DeJounte Murray still dealing with his injury. And so I looked it up not knowing the answer other than what I've watched the Pelicans. So I just filtered for Ingram without any of those other 3 gentlemen available. Those minutes have not gone particularly well so far. 306.
Well, here let me interrupt you before we talk about that. We got the Holmgren news.
Okay.
It is in fact a hip fracture.
Oh no.
Which I have never seen like just a hard fall lead to like a hip fracture. So a return to play protocol will be provided in 8 to 10 weeks. He's expected to return this season, according to the team. But yeah, I mean, so 10 weeks, that's basically start of February. So maybe he's back in March.
After the All-Star break, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that would be, it seems like if a return to play protocol will be provided in 8 to 10 weeks.
Yeah, I think we're talking.
So, I mean,
March.
that's like you can't ramp up from a fracture because he's going to have to be nearly immobile for a long time. Like it'll take him at least a month after that 8 to 10 weeks. I would think. So that really sucks. Hopefully Hartenstein can get back soon. I still think OKC will be pretty effective, but that's just such a bummer because he was playing incredibly well. And yeah, I mean, it was just a crazy fall. I mean, just a really aggressive collision. Like just nothing you can do about that when it comes to basketball. But like I've never seen someone just like suffer a fractured hip from a fall on a basketball court. Like he just like that's what hit first. Like I think he hit just like right on like that knob of the hip bone. And yeah, I mean, he knew something was pretty fucked when it first happened. It was just I was hopeful because I didn't see any like joint go in like some crazy direction. But yeah, I mean, it was just the most obvious thing, I guess, that's a real bummer.
Unfortunately, I have experience dealing with hip fractures, but it's older members of my family, not
yeah, I mean, that's why I was like, it's pretty rare to see. I mean, I can't, I mean, you'll get like a dislocation or like, we'll talk about that, I guess, in a second with Memphis, but,
yeah.
All right. I mean, so should we let's cleanse our palate and talk about something less depressing. Oh wait, the Pelicans.
Yeah. So the Ingram only minutes. 306 clean glass possession.
Wait. So are these numbers? Is he like literally out there by himself? Is that what you're talking about here?
Statistically, yeah.
These numbers are that bad.
This is Ingram. This is Ingram on Williamson, McCollum, Murray off. Not that there have been many Murray on minutes because of how much time he's missed. Negative 26.3 net rating. And if you're wondering, well, how do you get to a negative 26? Well, you have a 100.7 offensive rating and a 127 defensive rating, both of which are heinous. And not that this is Ingram's fault, of course. I'm just saying those minutes have not really gone well. The most used lineup is Jose Alvarado, Jordan Hawkins, who is now hurt as well, Javonte Green, Brandon Ingram and Yves Missi. There's no one can save that lineup. Those are, they're
I mean, I don't think that is not a negative 26 net rating.
Well, no, that's the most. I guess that's the most
used. You're saying, but
yeah, there are other ones that are less dynamic. And something that cracked me up a little bit though is Ingram's full season stats aren't, especially when you focus more on the efficiency stuff. Like his true shooting and usage are actually kind of close to last year. Like individually, like his true shooting is both close to last year and the year before. Usage is between the last 2 years. But of course, it's the overall team offense. It's everything else like that. And I mean, I wouldn't expect any non-superstar to be able to kind of like save a group that's this hurt. And the other big...
Well, let's talk about that actually, because, like there's been times before where he has saved their offense. Like the year that they started 3-16,
sure.
Like that was because the criticism was like, he doesn't help you win. Right. And that year he did. Like him coming back helped them make the play-in and the playoffs, and he had a nice playoffs that year in 22. But the thing is that all of the other stuff, because he doesn't really do much of the winning stuff other than just floor raise you on the offensive end, which they have desperately needed at times when, say, Zion Williamson is missing the entire season with a broken foot. But he can't really floor raise this group because he requires so much making up for in all the other floor game factors. And because he's like not helping, like he's not like inspiring this group, he's not really leading them, he's not providing hustle plays or defense or just smart floor game plays. So if he has a good team around him that needs floor raising, he could be valuable. But yeah, as your best player with like a limited team like this, it's like, he's really just not able to do anything.
It also, the big man situation is Daniel Tice, who's been fine, I would say, overall to start the year relative to expectations, and rookie Yves Missi. And Missi's had some good blocks and everything else, but it hasn't been great. I pulled it these last I saw, he's 129th in Seth rim protection of 413 NBA players in total. It's not separated out by position. Part of that is that the Pelicans opponents have a high rim attempt rate when Missi's on the floor, but some of that is Pelican stuff.
So, I mean, they're done now, right? 3-7, no Zion. I mean, like CJ is still out for them too. Jordan Hawkins is still out. I mean, if they could get Murray, if they get everyone back except Zion, which could happen in the next like 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, they're probably going to be maybe 10 games under 500 when they get everyone back except for Zion. And, I'm going to presume Zion's going to miss at least a month here. So, and they don't have as much depth as in the past, but I mean, people are forgetting that they're missing Murray too, because he played one game, which was a very successful one for them. But I think they're probably done, but they're sort of in that, like, they're not really going to tank. They're way too talented for that. And they could try to trade Ingram. I don't know if that's really going to, like, who's going to give up much for him? Like, you would rather, if you're just going to get like a shitty first for him, you probably would rather just hold on to him and see what happens in the offseason. So, like, they have, a couple of draft picks. They gave up that Lakers pick, but they still have the Bucks pick if it's in the top 4. But, it really would be about their own draft pick. So, I mean, it seems like they're just sort of like headed for 35 wins. Like,
well, I think
don't
that
see them
part of what Willie Green can do here is, and more, maybe this is more even David Griffin, is you can do your best over the next month plus, and if you don't have to try to tank, the tank might try you, and then you can just kind of get there from there. But I mean, it's so different. I
mean, they could certainly have more injuries.
It's so different with the East and the West. I brought this up a little bit. We were talking about big picture stories last week. Is being, it's like BPI's projection with them with 36 wins. There are
that's 12.
There are like 8 Eastern Conference teams that have a worse projection than that right now. And there are only 3 Western Conference teams, the Spurs, the Blazers, and the Jazz. So if they're that kind, if they're below that standard now, well, then I don't think everyone's gone away from you, but they're far enough away that at least you could have these conversations where the East are like, we're still in it.
All right, let's move on here to the aforementioned Memphis Grizzlies. Their stats, please.
They are 6-4 on the season, and remarkably, they're 5th in net rating, plus 7.1. 5th on offense, 10th on defense, one of the other rare teams that's top 10 in both. BPI projects the Grizzlies to finish with 45 wins, which would be the 7 seed, and they have a respectable chance of making the playoffs. Unfortunately, though, they are going to be without Ja Morant for an indefinite period of time, but it doesn't seem great.
Yeah, he's considered week to week. And the way it happened on Wednesday against the Lakers was he went up off of 2 feet for an alley-oop in transition, got undercut by Rui Hachimura. No foul was called, amazingly. I don't know how. But the way he landed was kind of got bumped a little bit. Lands with his torso way forward, basically over his right hip. And so basically what you can imagine happened here is because the way he landed, his leg was kind of straight, that the hip just slightly dislocated back towards the glute. So you think of like the hip is the ball and socket joint, and you don't see that often, but he knew it immediately. He immediately asked out of the game. It didn't seem like it was like permanently out of position, but he suffered, it sounds like, a grade 1 pelvic muscle strains. And so the issue, apparently there's no dislocation, but the issue could still be, a possible hip labrum tear. It could be, we've seen guys who have had that. Jeff Stotts wrote a good article about it. Guys like LaMarcus Aldridge who had hip issues, but that was more of kind of a chronic thing. I mean, the labrum in your hip is the same as your shoulder. It's kind of the muscle that allows it to go around in a circle and holds it in there. And so, you certainly, if you have to have surgery on that, that could be a problem. And it's also with his athletic style. I mean, this is a direct result of that kind of crazy style that he's played. We don't know how he hurt his shoulder. I think that was in practice a year ago, but we've seen him get ankle sprains and stuff. I mean, it's a shame because they actually were playing extremely well with him on the floor. In particular, you mentioned they're 5th on offense, which is awesome, and they were getting to the basket like crazy. Per Sport Radar, this is another one of the metrics they have, is possessions on which the offense gets a paint touch or touches the paint. So you can dribble in, you can pass it to the paint, whatever. The Grizz are doing that on a league high 66.4% of their possessions. Now, you don't have to get a lot of paint touches to be a great offense, right? Boston is actually last in this metric at 48.4% of their possessions resulting in a touch of the paint. But the Grizz plus 13 net rating with Ja on the floor. I do think Scottie Pippen, though, can come in and play some good basketball behind him. Luke Kennard is back to give him a little more playmaking, but they're also missing Desmond Bane, of course, as well. Pippen is a guy who his turnover rate on Basketball Reference is 20%, which is a massive number. But what that doesn't consider, that's why we have our stats with total usage, is that he sets up one of his teammates on 16.5% of possessions with a potential assist. So if you look at both the amount that he's shooting, his scoring usage is right around 16% as well. Actually, then he's only turning it over on like 4% of possessions or so, which is a high number, but it's not crazy high compared to, when you see that huge number on Basketball Reference, because that doesn't account for the number of times he's setting people up. So he's got 60% true shooting okay from 3. And yeah, he'll get stuck under the basket and throw it away sometimes. But my only concern is that if he's playing a massive role, that maybe his defense won't be as good, because that's been awesome too.
Memphis is starting 5 both Friday against the Wizards and Sunday against the Portland Trailblazers. Not exactly a murderer's row, but their starting five has been Scottie Pippen Jr., Jalen Wells. I guess you'd say Santi Aldama at the 3, Brandon Clark at the 4, Jared Jackson at the 5. Now, the last 3 get a little bit murky. They're all bigs. It's just how you want to classify it. And granted, some of this is their opposition, but they won both those games going away. And you do have to do that. So they beat the Wiz by 24, and then they beat the Blazers, which is going to nuke their net rating. We'll talk about that shortly. 134-89. There are reasons for that. but one piece of good news for the Grizz is that Marcus Smart is close to being back. So he's missed 6 straight with a right ankle sprain, but he wasn't immediately ruled out of Sunday's game. It was kind of more of a late scratch. So it seems like he'll be back soon. The Grizzlies need that perimeter help. I said they're starting 3 bigs, and it's also something to keep an eye on. So it made more sense to me in the Wizards game because Valanciunas doesn't start for the Wiz right now. But Zach Edey came off the bench again against the Blazers, and the Blazers play a traditional 5, basically all the competitive minutes because you have Klingon and Ayton, and then now you actually have Rob Williams there too. So like that theory is a little bit more tenuous now.
Yeah, well, I think part of that is just to get more offense on the second unit. Like, I think they're going to start actually running more stuff through him. If you just, like, it's Scottie Pippen and it's Jaren, who's having an awesome year so far, 65% true shooting on 27 usage. Also has really lowered his turnover rate. He hasn't been the same force blocking shots as he was 2 years ago, which is still something to keep an eye on. But so he's been really good. But outside of Jaren and Pippen, like, he's probably their 3rd best creator who's available right now. Like, Bane is still out. Smart is going to be back, you know, in a little bit from this ankle sprain. So yeah, I think like they need someone who can create a shot, and you know, Edey certainly, you know, 21 usage, 66% true shooting. You got Jay Huff also. Like, some of these bigs are just crazy. Like Jay Huff, 79% true shooting on like not a small usage either, like 18%. He was unbelievable.
Well, I mean, there's something crazy. I think Jay Huff is like top 10 in BPM right now this year.
Yeah, but 79% true shooting will do that. I mean, he blocks some shots too. Like, his rim protection numbers are like totally solid. You know, he's up and he's like doing that at a totally good center level. It's just really surprising to me that he could never really get a job. I do think we're getting like maybe a little too much Jalen Wells right now. You know, it would be lovely if Luke Kennard could play a bit more. You know, maybe he can ramp up. Although I think they have an understanding that he can't play that many minutes. But, you know, I like this Grizz team. We talked about it right at the beginning when they were playing like 10 guys, even with so many people out. I mean, if they can survive Ja and Bane and Smart all being out, and they've won 2 in a row, albeit against 2 terrible teams, like, but like incredibly comfortably. Like, this is another one of those teams we talked about. They just have this floor of like competitiveness.
Wait, can I say the top 5 for BPM just because it's kind of amazing?
Number 1, we got to.
Number 1, Jokic plus 13.9, miles half ahead of everybody else. Number 2, Jason Tatum plus 9.1. Number 3, Jay Huff 8.6. Number 4, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander 8.4. Number 5, Tari Eason 8.1.
Tari Eason, yeah, he's definitely always been a advanced metrics darling. Let's talk Clippers and Kings. Clippers got an ugly win.
Oh, yeah.
In that matchup over the weekend. They are 6-4. 12th in net rating, 2.3. 21st on offense, 3rd on defense. BPI says they're a 43-win team, which would be the 10th seed. Playoff odds of 45%, but obviously many teams clustered in that range at the moment. So what are your big takeaways from this Clippers-Kings matchup from the Clippers standpoint?
So I thought that they got with the early part of the game was really interesting because it was a lot of Harden and Powell getting downhill and either setting up shots for themselves or teammates. I mean, Powell had this massive game, 31 points, 5 of 9 from 3, was bombing it from 3, but also was successful from 2, got to the line, had 12 rebounds. I thought there were a lot of points where he was the best player on the floor. And that was,
I mean, how does it feel having seen Norman Powell in college at UCLA to know that he's like one of the most consistent shooters in the NBA?
I'm thrilled for him. And he's been a part of great teams. He's been a part of teams that weren't necessarily as good, and I'm really happy he gets to start and that he's like getting this opportunity. And he was huge in this Clippers win. And I have some big picture stuff on the Kings, and we'll get into that. But like, one of the most important things in this is like basketball doesn't have to be complicated. And if one team is 14 of 30 on threes and the other team is 3 of 26 on threes, one of those teams is overwhelmingly likely to win. And that is what happened here. But I thought that the other thing that was funny is I had a note originally and then, watched the whole game, was like, it seems like Kevin Porter Jr. is doing nothing. But then, like, I kind of grew to appreciate a little bit. It's a lot of like kind of self-created stuff. It's just kind of getting into it. But he ended up, the Clippers need some of that with the guys that are unavailable, particularly Kawhi. And so 11 points for him, 5 of 9 from the field. And Chris Dunn, I think part of the reason that he didn't do as much, he's been a nice difference maker in some of the Clippers wins that I've seen, is that the Kings, they kind of function a little bit differently offensively. And so he can't really shut off the water in that same way. That's not the way Sacramento's guards really work. And I thought like Malik Monk had some really nice stretches too. We'll get into that. But for me with the Clippers, I want to give Ty Lue, I want to acknowledge like this team is playing hard. They did get a big advantage for the threes they're taking, but like I thought they were going to be dead in the water without PG, with Kawhi being out, and they played hard.
Can I give you the craziest stat on that? This is a great Ty Lue stat, and I think in predicting that the Clippers were going to really struggle this year, I probably didn't give Lue enough credit. The Clippers have a 7.8 net rating with James Harden off the floor.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and it's all with the defense too. They're a 98 defensive rating with him off the floor. Dunn replaces him. I mean, I guess, they stagger Porter Jr., but and I mean, a lot of that even is they don't really have a great backup center. They've still got Kai Jones out there. He's only played 74 minutes though, but they have defended pretty well with him out there.
Yeah, and they didn't play with the backup center at all in this game.
Yeah, so and then Nick Batum has a 94 defensive rating right now, and a lot of those are with him playing at center. Yeah. So,
by the way,
a lot of switching in this game, right?
Yes, Nick Batum plus 13 in 11 minutes did not take a shot from the field. The most Nick Batum of all lines. But yeah, I mean, Ty Lue, it's been pretty impressive. And what other kind of wild thing? I think this is golden one center logging is that both teams made every shot inside 4 feet, but I think there's some logging stuff there. I brought this up before, but it was another reason why I feel that way. And so, yeah, I mean, the Clippers, they're 5-4. They've been more successful than I anticipated, and at times they've kind of taken advantage of some situations as you're supposed to do. You knock down the pins they set up, but they've been more competitive. I thought this wasn't.
Yeah, I thought when they were struggling at Intuit Dome early, like, okay, they're coming back to earth, like it's going to be a long season. Then they really have righted the ship.
And I didn't think this was the greatest Harden performance. It was helped by him getting fouled. I think it was at least once. I can't remember if it was once or twice shooting threes, which it happens. It's a part of the Harden story, but I can transition to the Kings. Actually, before I do that, you want to do the stats?
Well, I want to give Harden stats here too.
Oh, sure.
I mean, he's getting to the foul line a reasonable amount. 31% usage. That's his highest in a long time. And he's shooting 8.1 free throw attempts per 36. He's shooting 30% on threes and 42% on twos. So, and like Harden has enough tricks, particularly in the regular season, even at age 35, that if you just give him the ball enough for a 31% usage, that he'll make some good passes and he'll get to the line enough to at least semi-salvage a respectable true shooting. But it's still at 53%. I mean, that is miserable by James Harden. I mean, he's been a true shooting god going back to that 6th Man of the Year season in OKC when he was like 66% true shooting, back when that actually meant something. It still actually does mean something. But in any event, yeah, Powell is the guy Powell and Zubac have been the ones who I think have really been keeping them afloat. Whereas Harden has kind of just been a usage hog, and like I think there are a lot of people who could kind of be in the role that he's in right now.
Speaking of usage hogs, KPJ, 31% usage, 42% true shooting.
Yeah, that's not great. I mean, he's been, again, thrust into a role that's probably too much for him.
Yeah, I really hope that KPJ, like that once they get Kawhi back, that he's just not really a big part of it, because like they do need some of that, but also like almost anyone else doing it would probably be better. I mean, I kind of like to see some Jordan Miller. I thought that he showed something. Maybe you entrust a little bit more to Chris Dunn, even though he can't shoot that well. I mean, try some different stuff, but like I've been impressed though. I mean, I thought that
at this point, why wouldn't you try Jordan Miller? I mean, he's not the same kind of player. He's more of like a slasher, attack from the wing, Euro step through the lane. Like, not, at least Kevin Porter Jr. has pretended to be a point guard before in his career. Like, that's not what Jordan Miller is. But maybe you just let Chris Dunn get you into the offense, and then you could try to run more plays for Jordan Miller. I mean, it's. Yeah, at some point, they're not going to be a +8 with James Harden off the floor all season. Like, that 97 defensive rating is not sustainable. The Kings, on the other hand, 6-4. They got that nice win without KD, of course, in Phoenix, but on the road, they won by 9 in overtime. Another example indicating that overtime is too long. But they are 6-4. And they've been taking care of bad teams, at least. They're actually 6th in net rating, plus 5.8, 7th on offense, 11th on defense. They have played some atrocious offenses, I think, is a big part of that. But they still project for 41 wins is all, but again, still right in that morass. That would be the 11 seed, 34% chance at the playoffs. What did you have from them in this game?
I was a little bit apoplectic in the beginning because Sacramento was giving up so many drives to the basket. And over the last year, we gained an appreciation for the supplemental rim protection that the Kings were getting from players who are not Domantas Sabonis. And some of that is different this year because DeMar DeRozan is there. But you need to do a better job containing it. So I had this thing, and I was like, oh, man, the Kings are really missing Keon Ellis's defense. And I do believe that Sacramento's defensive numbers are being buttressed by by who they have played. And there's some statistics backing that up. We talked about that a little bit a few days ago. That said, I think that I will have a challenge as an analyst this year. And this is not the first time this has been the case. It's just a continuing thing for me. That Sacramento, so the defensive stuff, I think that's gonna. I think I'm closer to right than the numbers are right now. And you saw it in the Clippers game. But when the Kings start, it's like the other thing I was thinking about is I'm like, oh yeah, like they're replacing him with Kevin Huerter. Kevin Huerter's not really making his threes at that kind of rate, 33%, 8.1. And so the theory that I have with it is that Huerter, you need his shooting out there because of DeRozan, but he's not really making them. And then what having Huerter out there does is it just makes life tactically easy for opposing defenses because you're going to have a guard, and you don't really have Fox can take those assignments a portion of the time. We've seen Keegan Murray take those assignments a portion of the time, but like they don't really have those defenders. It's like, oh, they're really missing that. They are to an extent, but Mike Brown's intended starting lineup, which has been the Kings' primary starting lineup, going into tonight, plus 9.2 in 215 clean glass possessions, and that's not with opponent shooting luck. It is ridiculous that they're forcing, and remember, Keon Ellis is not in these minutes, 19% opponent turnover rate when Huerter, Fox.
Yeah, I mean, that's like you played the Blazers and the Jazz. I mean, I don't know. I and like the Clippers, our team's going to
agree. Like that, and that was one of those.
I really want to see where that's at the end of the year. Like, because I can't say I've seen things when I watch them are like, oh man,
well,
these guys
so
are just
they did
making the opponent so uncomfortable.
The Kings did. So there was a wild late run in this game. The Clippers went up like 15. They went up 16 with 5:30 left, and I turned the game off. And then I saw what happened. I'm like, I have to go back and watch it, which I did. And a big thing that happened was they got some ball pressure, forced some Clippers turnovers, and then were able to convert on that, in which they hadn't been as good at earlier in the game. And so that it provided a little bit of the platform. Now, the Kings only briefly got back into contact. But so like I have these concerns, but what I was saying about calibrating myself as an analyst is that the Kings offense, I brought up the rating, and some of that is the defensive success that I think is unsustainable. But this Kings group has been successful on offense so far. When they've been successful on offense, and it's by doing things really kind of DeRozan-y. They're 29th in 3-point percentage, 23rd in 3-point attempt rate, but they're going into today, they were 7th in offense. And some of that is,
I think they can honestly get better. Like
I think so too.
Murray, and like he usually seems to start the year poorly shooting for some reason, but Murray, Monk, Herter, Trey Lyles is just been absolutely atrocious shooting the ball.
Oh, and he had a couple of bad misses in the one on Saturday.
He's got the 37% true shooting for him.
Yeah. Or Friday, anyway.
So
yeah,
I think like Fox, DeRozan, like Sabonis, maybe he's a little over his head, but he's moved into much more of a play finisher. Like his post ups are relatively dried up.
Yeah, and
at this point.
And so the question is, well, how are the Kings doing it? Well, part of it, I brought up the DeRozan stuff. They're getting to the foul line a lot. They never turn the ball over. Those are very important. The Kings are actually 20th in offensive rebound rate, so it's mostly not that. But then they are still holding, and this is the benefit of playing with Fox and some of these other guys, they're 6th in transition frequency. And their points per 100 there is a little bit lower because their offensive rating in transition, but it's a little bit noisy this early in the season, small sample, all that type of stuff. So I think that some of what I'm seeing is just like that they succeed in a different way, and they have to wrap your mind around that. Part of the joy of NBA basketball is that teams can succeed and fail in different ways. But it also depends on what you're thinking of the Kings being. Like, are they a high level playoff team? They were a hosting playoff team just 2 seasons ago, or are they just like, team that's fighting for a play-in spot, and that these nuances will matter in those conversations. And so, I think that the defensive stuff they're playing over their heads, they've been lucky in terms of opponents and some other stuff, not opponent shooting, but just overall. But part of it is just that teams like this can work if you have players as good as their players are.
Yeah, the Clippers were a tough matchup for them because of their switching ability. Like, there isn't really anyone that they're throwing out there. Even Harden, like against DeRozan, he's not a terrible matchup because DeRozan isn't going to beat you with quickness. And he's going to try to use his size and like get into the body and create space, which Harden actually can defend pretty well. And then, maybe like Fox against Harden would be a little bit of an issue, but then they have really good rim protection with Zubats. And in contrast to the way that the Kings used to play, Zubats can just kind of hang out around the rim because, you're not all that worried about the Sabonis handoff to a shooter, and then the big has to get out on that. So, and Zubats can't, or Sabonis can't bludgeon Zubats inside of it. So this is a tough matchup, in addition to shooting 3 of 26 from 3, as you noted. So I'm sure the Kings would have been right there. And they are just absolutely bludgeoning the rim over. I mean, they're shooting 59% from 2.
Yeah, and I like that you use that number because in terms of the splits, maybe some of the Golden One stuff gets in there, but 59% from 2 is ridiculous, and you can't fudge that.
Yeah, and then their contested finishing, I mean, our numbers push it out to 5 feet, so we get all those ones that are, this is from our numbers, the contested finishing within 5 feet rather than 3 or 4, because like some of these arenas just log that as like right on the edge of the restricted area instead of in it. So that's why we do 5 feet. That's kind of statistically where outside of 5 feet, where the numbers start falling off and you really kind of, the upper paint begins. But so on contested shots within 5 feet, 63.5%, 47.6% on long twos as a team. And then overall shooting at the rim, both contested and uncontested, 72.3%. So like they are not like getting a ton of shots at the rim, but they're making all the ones that they are getting. They're hitting a bunch of long twos. And I mean, it's kind of similar formula to the way that those Spurs offenses were pretty good with DeRozan. They didn't take a lot of threes. They made a lot of them. We'll see if the Kings can get that part of the formula. The whole Ellis off the bench thing, I want to get back to that since you were mentioning it. I mean, I think they just have to stagger he and Keegan Murray. Because you have to have one of those guys on the floor at all time. Otherwise, they just have no one to guard the ball. Like, those are the only two guys who are, like, plus options guarding the ball. So you got to have one of those guys.
I think you could manage it with both of them starting. You just have to. It's harder for Mike.
Yeah, but if you're going to do that, then you're going to play Keon Ellis, 30 minutes or something to do that, and still have all these other mouths to feed as well.
Well, and at moments in this game, I was frustrated that it felt like both Keegan Murray and Malik Monk were being marginalized. Monk more in terms of just like he's coming off the bench. He just, it seems like he shot out of a cannon every time I'm watching play. And he had some nice, but had another really nice dunk similar to the one that he had earlier in the week that we talked about. And he is at 21% usage, playing 27 minutes per game, so maybe I shouldn't be as bad about it. And with Keegan Murray, like 16 usage, he's not really going to have the ball in his hands that much on this team. And I don't know what he would be doing in a different circumstance. But I do wonder about whether those two guys could be doing more with Monk. We lamented it when they signed DeRozan, that one of the downsides was we weren't going to get to see him as much. And I wonder whether one of the wrinkles they'll consider trying, even though it would duplicate some of the creation stuff, is whether they'll at least dabble with Monk replacing Herter in the starting lineup.
Yeah, it seems like they're also like, Herter is one of these guys like, oh, you might lose him if you don't start him. And like Monk got paid, so this is also true. I mean, if they could just figure out a little more depth, right? I mean, like here are a few pretty awful net ratings, right? Like Alex Len, he's been unplayable. Like he's out of the rotation. So they're going, and particularly for a team that doesn't have any size in the wing, it's really hard to play Trey Lyles at center, and he's not coming through on the shooting part of that bargain to give you the stretch five, so you're really good on offense. But Sabonis and Murray really are the most irreplaceable guys on this team right now because they have DeRozan, Monk, and Fox all as guys who can play make on the perimeter. But Murray, I mean, he's played 381 minutes and only been off the floor for 109. And he's a plus 9.7 net rating. They're negative 9.9 with him on the bench. And Sabonis, the splits are even more extreme. They're 25.7 points per 100 better with him on the floor.
Whew.
Versus off. Let's get to the Lakers here.
Yes. The Lakers are 5-4 on the season. Negative 1.8 net rating. 10th in offense, 22nd on defense. Projected for 44 wins. That would be 8th in the West. And a note from Shams Charania on Anthony Davis. He's been dealing with plantar fasciitis in his foot. Was dealing with this since the end of last year, including the Olympics. And he played in Friday's win over the Sixers. I believe he played in their win over the Raptors as well. Yes, he did. He played 26 minutes. But that's just going to be a challenge. And then there's the D'Angelo Russell saga.
Yeah, they moved him back to the bench, which, I mean, I guess it's a good idea. He was struggling. Maybe he can come in now firing with no conscience. And it does put more burden on LeBron to do more. But, he's still a guy who's a superstar. Like, he's just going to have to deal with that. Like you noted, his usage has only been about 25% so far.
They're getting him ready for the NBA Cup, Nate.
Start ramping up. So, yeah, but of course, Now they're starting Cam Reddish. Cam Reddish is back. He started playing on their road trip in the Detroit game, came in at the end of the second quarter and gave him a little bit of a boost, and he absolutely never shoots anymore, but he is their only guy with any kind of size who can guard on the wing because Rui Hachimura kind of struggles with that, but now at least they're like huge with him replacing D'Angelo Russell. But like, not playing that amazing starting unit that's like the greatest starting unit ever. There's no holes at all with Austin Reeves and D'Lo and Hachimura and LeBron and AD. Man, do you know that group was 23-10 last year? Nobody was tanking at all during that time, of course.
No, definitely not.
I mean, shouldn't they have fired Darvin Ham last offseason? Like, how could he be breaking up that starting unit that he should have been fired for not starting? Oh, wait. They did get a new coach? This is like my biggest theme, is just like pretending it was all Darvin Ham's fault. And, there's all these like, it's so obvious that like they could be getting more of this amazingly talented roster if he just hadn't played Taurean Prince. Like, okay, yeah, fine. Maybe like Taurean Prince wasn't that good, and you should have started some other guys like who, by the way, weren't playing well at the start of the year. And by the way, like they with that group did win them the NBA Cup. They were playing well. So like, yeah, he could have been a little bit better. But this idea that, especially for like, you've got LeBron and AD, this isn't like Mike Budenholzer coming in to coach a 23 or 24-year-old Giannis, or Steve Kerr coming in to coach a, mid-20s Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green. Like, the idea that a group led by LeBron and Anthony Davis was like going to be able, I mean, A, that there was like, they're going to teach him so many new tricks, or B, that those guys even can learn any new tricks in addition to like some of these other guys like a D'Lo or something like that. It just, yeah, I think there's some better stuff they could do on the margins. Like, they get in the high 40s and wins maybe, but like this, just JJ Redick, like high geography that happened when they started 3-0. I mean, maybe it could still happen, but and they've won a couple straight since they've come back. They're now 5-0 at home. But it's just like this idea that there is some just like magic formula that Darvin Ham couldn't unlock. I never bought that.
I was going to ask you about that. So the Lakers are now 5-0 at home, 1-4 on the road. Do you think there's anything to that?
Yeah, statistical variance probably.
That is as good an explanation as any, probably better than most. I mean, it is worth noting that they lost, like one of their losses was getting pretty comfortably beaten by Detroit in Detroit. Like, it's not like it's like, oh, you played really tough teams. No, like they played some good teams at home.
I would actually, I would say that like that's about a 50% win expectancy for Detroit in that game against this team.
I mean, they played
like Danny, I've long been a Detroit believer.
But like, I mean, if you look at who the Lakers have played, like they've played some good and bad teams at home and on the road, but it's 10 games.
Some more interesting stats for the Lakers: 38% on self-created threes and only 33% on team-created. Usually those two numbers are quite the opposite. So the fact that they're shooting so well on self-created threes, like 38% on self-created threes is like a crazy number. And that's a lot of that's LeBron. Reeves is kind of more of an off the dribble guy at times. D'Lo will do that some too. He's maybe more comfortable there, but that's a number that should get better. But yeah, they don't have a lot of like awesome spot up mavens. Some of the guys that are taking their spot ups, like a Gabe Vincent, are just like not making any of them. Want to get back to that Sport Radar paint touch stat. Possessions, I'm talking about possessions in which they get the ball into the paint. The Lakers are 13th in the frequency of getting the ball into the paint, but second in efficiency when they do get there. And that is mostly with stuff occurring in the paint. It's not necessarily kicking, because this is both paint touches and then passing out. Just what happens overall in the possession once you get a paint touch. So generally, when they get into the paint, it leads to something happening in the paint. It's not necessarily kicking out. So they are top 5 in terms of paint touches, leading to shots at the rim and to shots in the upper paint. They are 30th with only 10% of their paint touch possessions leading to a three-pointer. So this is not exactly team drive and kick, to say the least. Another thing, though, that's pretty impressive is, and this has long been a big AD selling point, is they almost never turn it over on possessions where they touch the paint. So they turn it over the least on paint touching possessions. Meanwhile, their transition defense has also struggled. Again, LeBron and AD maybe not going to turn over a bunch of new leaves there. And if it's not LeBron and AD, they have no other players who can protect the rim or even like fly around to close out on a three-point.
Can I give the cleaning the glass stats on this briefly before we get into?
Please do, yeah. Because that's like more macro. Mine is a little smaller than that. So
the Lakers are 30th in opponents' points plus per 100 possessions, 6.7. Second worst is the Jazz at 5.5 per 100 possessions. So that's where, and they're third to last in opponent transition frequency. But then the other wild one, and you expect this to regress the mean, Lakers opponents have a 143 offensive rating in transition.
Yeah, and what's the league median there? Like 120,
123.
Yeah. And then there are a number of ways in which you can be bad in transition defense. And the Lakers have accomplished nearly all of those. They are second worst. So another one of the stats that Sport Radar has is they'll give you stats on basically power plays for the offense in transition. So on 11.4% of possessions on defense, the Lakers are giving up a power play of at least +1. So more offensive players, at least one more offensive player in the zone than defensive players. Now, of course, you can still get transition and score when you don't have that power play, and they also have been really bad there in terms of allowing teams to score even when in transition, even when the numbers are even, which shows you either that they are not communicating. It could mean that their good defensive player, Anthony Davis, has not gotten back, and therefore they can just go right by whoever is guarding them, even though the numbers are even. So, yeah, it is kind of interesting to see as we'll have all year, hopefully, to go through these stats, and I can hopefully give you more insights than I have already. I've only been able to spend a couple hours with this so far, but it's interesting that a lot of the worst transition defenses seem to give up a lot when the opponent doesn't actually technically have a numbers advantage, but just like they're not communicating, their individual defenders can't stay in front of everyone, there's no help available. That's where a lot of these transition plays happen, not when it's just 3-on-2, 2-on-1, that old drill that you used to do in high school. Who's up next here?
The Minnesota Timberwolves are 6-4 on the season, 8th in net rating plus 5.6, 8th on offense, 9th on defense. Project for 46 wins, which would be 6th in the West. And 9th on defense isn't bad, but 9th on defense is a lot worse than they were before. What's up?
Yeah, so of course last year they were over 2 points per 100 better than the second best Orlando Magic defensively, and that is how they were able to have a below average offense and still be a 56 win juggernaut. And I think that they're playing relatively well in some ways. There are other ways that they're not, but the number one, the Rudy Gobert on numbers haven't been that amazing. 112 when he's on, but they're also just terrible when he's off the floor. 125.1. And many people have pointed to the absence of Karl Anthony Towns, replacing him with Julius Randle. But the other problem is they also lost Kyle Anderson. They used to play Kyle Anderson with Nas and Karl Anthony Towns. Part of that was because you had great shooting with both Towns and Reed. So you're able to play someone like Anderson, who was really struggling to shoot. He's been better in Golden State, but last year he was completely lost it. But he's like gives you a lot more size on the perimeter. And I think one of the things I was saying at the start of the season was, well, they're just going to have to play Jaden McDaniels more and play him on some of those bench units. But he just generally hasn't been as effective. And, he hasn't necessarily been terrible, but looking at some of his numbers for on Sport Radar with, they have a number of categories of just help defense basically. I won't take you through every single one of them, but he's just gone down a little bit in some of those categories, more in terms of just the number rather than the effectiveness of times that he's helping. And then, he hasn't been quite as much of a stopper on the ball as well. And, they've had some other things like Mike Conley has been struggling a little bit too. But really it comes down to that rim protection. And the lack, not only is it Randall and Reed, both of whom are undersized and are not good rim protectors, but then you also aren't really playing like a pure three with a lot of length with that group. And so, yeah, they're going to struggle on defense. Offense pretty good though, 126.6 on offense with Rudy off the floor.
Yeah. Somehow a team with a 125 defensive rating in the non-Gobert minutes has a positive net rating. That's because your offense is supernova. It's pretty incredible. I was looking at that as well. And those lineups have good size. They have good size on the guard line, but they don't have natural small forwards for a lot of those minutes. You have Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who I love, but isn't really that guy. Or you have Joe Ingles, who is slower than most people. So one big concern for Minnesota's defense is that you would think, you get this stuff. Well, maybe there's some opponent shooting luck and that'll regress. Absolutely not. The Wolves, they were fortunate last year, and we thought that might regress to the mean. They've been even more fortunate so far. Teams are only shooting 33% on three-pointers against the Wolves. That is the fourth worst rate so far. Though, and I mean, then you talked about this a little bit with Gobert, is that instead why their field goal percentage allowed has gotten worse is because teams are making a lot more of their shots at the rim and floaters, and I expect floaters to regress to the mean. But those things stabilize a little earlier than the three-point shoot.
Yeah, a couple other things we can talk about too here that they're struggling with. They are much worse in transition defense so far. Last year, they were 5th in preventing opponents from running off of misses. They're 21st this year. But probably the biggest thing is that they were 5th last year in forcing turnovers, and this year they are 21st. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. One is the loss of Anderson. Another was McDaniels not being as effective. Although you'd think that DiVincenzo could help out there at least a little bit. But then also I think schematically is part of it on that second unit. Like they're doing more switching. Because recall last year when they would run pick and roll at like Towns on the second unit, Towns would get out on the floor usually, and they'd play some of the similar pick and roll defense to what they played back before Gobert got there in 22, where they actually forced a lot of turnovers. And generally, even if you have a guy like Karl-Anthony Towns, who's not some shark or something, just by putting 2 on the ball and then having guys like McDaniels or Anderson behind the play to make plays, you can you'll give up more, just in general, more threes and more shots at the rim, but you'll also speed the opponent up and force some turnovers. They're not really doing that as much. They don't either have the personnel or that same scheme so far this season. And Gobert's numbers protecting the rim, it's early. So, I mean, if you look at some of these names that are high up, Gobert is like, we're a little just outside the top 10, but you've also got, Jackson Hayes in there. You've got a few guys that aren't known for their rim protection.
You have Jay Huff in there.
I did note that. You got Kevon Looney. I mean, it's definitely early. We're 2.5 weeks into the season right now. There's going to be, the contest percentage. I think that's more real than the opponent restricted.
Oh wait,
field goal percentage.
Very briefly, we're not talking about them in this episode, but you know who has the highest contest rate of anybody in the top, I don't know, maybe in the entire league right now. I don't know if you noticed this.
Sarr?
Alexander Sarr.
Yeah, well, he's playing center.
Yeah.
He's been interesting so far. a big story going around too is that Anthony Edwards, I think he had the most made threes in the first 9 games of the season by anyone not named Steph, and only 2 or 3 Steph seasons were ahead of that. Overall, Edwards is getting them up like crazy. He had a viral moment where he was asked, what would you say to people who say you're shooting too many threes? And he said, fuck them. And yeah, when you're shooting 48% on 11.5 per 36, you are allowed to say that. Now, would it be nice if he was shooting better than 51% on twos and 67% from the foul line? Yeah, that would be nice. Be nice if he had more than 3.5 assists as well.
Yeah, and saying that, and then Edwards had I didn't watch it, but had a challenging game against the Heat where the Timberwolves only scored 94 points, and Edwards had 22 points on 25 shooting possessions and only got to the line 3 times and turned the ball over 6 times.
And our last team is
the Portland Trail Blazers, last in the West, last in our hearts in the West. 3-7.
I'm trying to think of who would be last in my heart right now. Probably the Pels, just because they're so like when I say last in my heart, that's like the team I'd least like to watch a game of. That's probably the Pels.
And the Pels make me actively sad in a way that the Blazers don't, especially now that Shaedon Sharpe is back. So the Blazers, we'll talk about that in a second. Blazers 3-7 on the season, negative 7.8 net rating. It's actually only 26th in the league, 28th on offense, 17th on defense, projected for 31 wins, which is 14th. I do not think they will win 31 games. And the good news, Shaedon Sharpe.
No, they're not going to win 31 basketball
Shaedon
games.
Sharpe.
I mean, I don't know. I guess they are 3-7. That's not like totally outside the realm of that. Yeah. But
so
they're not going to get better over the course of the year. I didn't think.
Yeah, I mean, though they did just lose by, was it 46 to the Grizzlies at home
without Ja or Bane.
Yeah, or Smart. But so it's been good. Shaedon Sharpe, he played 20 minutes in the game on Thursday, and then he played the back-to-back against the Wolves. That was a good sign. And then he started in the game against the Grizzlies. Not that any of their starters played that much because they lost by 45 or whatever it was. And so good to see him out there. Still, I think Sharpe is still working his way back. And I cracked up because in that the first game where he returned, or in the what against the Wolves, their bench unit was Scoot, Sharpe in the first half, Ryan Rupert, and then that was Delano Banton in the second half, Jeremy Grant and Donovan Clingan. And I cracked up because I'm like, I would watch that lineup over their Blazer starters, who are not terrible. Like any day of the weekend, it wasn't close. But now that Sharpe's in the starting lineup, that calculus gets a little bit trickier.
Yeah, and I saw a few flashes of him in that San Antonio game where he went right into the chest of Victor Wembanyama for a hook shot off the pick and roll. The Victor Wembanyama that opponents are shooting 35% against at the rim. That was pretty impressive. Like you do see these flashes from him. So it was good to see him back out there after almost 10 months on the shelf. I mean, this offense is so bad. Like, it's just so bad up and down the lineup. And nobody who has any kind of a role on this team has higher than 55% true shooting. And that's Donovan Clingan, who is a 7'2" center. Clingan is blocking a deranged amount of shots. I'm sure we'll talk more about it, that aspect in the future. But I mean, just some of these numbers, you're DeAndre Ayton, who is just like an efficiency monster in Phoenix, is somehow below 20% usage and also 3 points below the league average in true shooting. And Deni Avdija has 48% true shooting, and it seems like Tuani Kamara has like already passed him in at least Chauncey Billups' hearts. Like, Kamara is probably a better one-on-one defensive player, and Avdija is he's not doing more than that on the offensive end either. So
well, and I mean, you brought it up. Toumani Kamara started over Avdija when Sharpe moved in the starting lineup against the Grizz.
Yeah, and it's just like the Avdija trade, I sort of understood the point of it, but the Blazers to me were in, I mean, maybe a year ahead, if that, ahead of Washington in their rebuild. And quite frankly, I would probably take Washington's rebuild like right now with Koulibaly and Sarr. I might like them better than anyone. I mean, we'll see if Sharp can deliver on some of his promise. And I still like Scoot too, but in terms of what they've shown so far, I might like those Wizard guy better. But it just like, yeah, and so they gave up 2 first-round picks, including the guy who became, or the pick that became Bub Carrington, who wouldn't have fit in on this team, but still, to bring in a guy who is like, in theory plays a role on a winning team. But yet they still have so many offensive mouths to feed. Not that any of these guys have been any good, but he still is like, 5th in the pecking order behind like Ayton, Simons, Jeremy Grant, 4th in the pecking order, I guess. Scoot coming off the bench, Sharp, if Sharp's going to start, like, in which Avdija isn't now.
Well, and what I couldn't shake, especially now with that him coming off the bench, is that one of the theories of the trade was, oh, well, even if Avdija isn't a perfect fit, if the Blazers take more time, well, that you can move him somewhere else. But if he's marginalized, if Avdija is coming off the bench, even not saying he'll do that forever, for a obviously bad team, it doesn't seem like you're going to be able to really, even with the positional scarcity, that you're really going to squeeze a diamond out of some other team.
No, it really, like, they probably could have been 3-7 with him. And like, yeah, you know what? If the front office were running this team, he would still be in the starting lineup over Kamara. But Chauncey Billups, who, is in, as far as we know, the last guaranteed year of his contract, and there is pressure to show improvement this year, he's doing what I assume he believes is giving them the best chance to win. So I mean, I would probably go with Avdija just to like get some more shooting on the floor, or maybe the idea is that Avdija can now handle the ball a little more on the second unit. I don't know. It hasn't been a great start for him. I mean, it's very early. We can go back and forth on these trades, but this isn't a situation where, hey, if this Rudy Gobert thing works out, we've got like, a conference finals level of ceiling here. Like Deni Avdija, at least this year, was not going to make the Portland Trailblazers do anything different.
I mean, if we're concerned about the Wolves defense, we should note that they play the Blazers back-to-back nights this week, so it'll look a little bit
better. Okay. We done here? I think, let's see if we got any more comments that we need to.
Hopefully no more devastating injury news since we started recording.
Yeah, now we got some YouTubian comments in here that we don't necessarily. It's some solid hot takes, which some other time we'll get to those. But that's it's gonna be probably it for after 2.5 hours of recording here. But thanks so much for listening, and also want to remind you all on the public feed we are going to be on NBA League Pass. What's our game on Tuesday?
It is Hawks Celtics.
Yeah, that is an NBA Cup game. So that'll be a lot of fun to do. And then, of course, we'll be wrapping up all of that action. Danny is going to cover the Klay Thompson return game, also an NBA Cup game, by the way. So a lot of interesting stuff on Tuesday on Dunc'd On Prime. But also, if you have League Pass, check us out. The NBA strategy stream, that Hawks Celtics game, we'll be doing our whole call. And the idea there basically it's I kind of do play-by-play, but it's more like stream of consciousness. It's like color as play-by-play. So to try to point out all the strategies in real time. And Danny has his finger on the pulse of all the stats during the games. We'll take your questions as well. So it'll be a fun chance to watch a game with us. Hope you all check that out on the NBA strategy stream. And thanks so much for listening.